You better be listening to Sleazoids or I must break you.
In the next few moments, we will try to give you an impression of a new kind of film experience.
They're sending back my message.
What does it mean?
This is no message. If there's an intelligence there, I want it to know there's an intelligence here. I think you're making a mistake. I think you really want to talk to me.
Sorry, I have 3 other interviews to do before this party's over.
Yeah, but they're not working on something that'll change the world as we know it.
Those weird hairs that were growing out of your back, I had them analyzed. But they were definitely not human.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sleazoids, the podcast where we go down the rabbit hole of 20th century genre fare, from the most influential canon classics to the trashiest exploitation films we can get our hands on, and invite you to tag along in helping us create a canon of sleaze. Each week is a double feature grindhouse style where we discuss 2 films loosely related by subject, genre, actor, filmmaker, or franchise, and at the end of each episode, along with our honorary Sleazoids, which you can become by subscribing on Patreon.
Here, I would usually give some type of hint of what we're going to do next week, but I forgot to ask Josh. So yeah, there you go. So he'll probably let you know later, or we'll figure it out. But join the sleaze. We appreciate it.
That's right. We decide on all the official ratings and rankings for every film that we cover. Patreon subscribers also get an on-air shout-out and 2 bonus episodes every single month, which we are in our 5th year of. There's something like 100 plus bonus episodes, as well as our bonus transmission series, which we just did one recently, a big boy, where we were talking about the new Michael Bay film Ambulance, as well as Batman and X, and a lot of the big new releases that have been out recently. So that, if that interests you at all, patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast. And speaking of which, we did have quite a few people make the jump this week, so we'll give them their shout outs here. We had Nick Ferguson upgrade from $5 a month to $10 a month to join us for the monthly virtual screening that we do on the last Thursday of every month. We also had Hart Boyd do the same thing, but actually upgrade for a year.
Awesome.
We had... who else here? Adam Craig, Heath Jarvis signed up, DVS signed up at $10 a month as well for the virtual screening. Lots of people. The virtual screenings, they're getting popular. You might want to get in on them.
They're fun.
William Henderson, Jared Scott, Christopher Fitzpatrick, Brian Alm, Liam Dunigan, Vinicius LC. These guys, come on. Damian Jordan, Randy, John Hayes, Mark Power, Stephen Mousseau, Andrew Ross. Wow, there's a lot here. Quaylen D. Tanner, Bennett Glass, who signed up for an entire year for the show. So thanks to Bennett. We had Ian McKinney, Tony fan. I think I know who that is. Might be a Tony Scott fan in particular. I don't know. We'll find out later. And then John O'Shea. So thanks so much to all of you folks. Hope you are enjoying those bonus episodes. We appreciate the support. The other plug for the week, as always, is Apple Podcasts. If you guys are listening on Apple Podcasts, and I see the stats, I know that you are. I can see you right now listening on Apple Podcasts. Scroll down to the very bottom, give us a good old rating and review down there. It helps us climb the ranks at iTunes and find new listeners. And the very last plug is merch. If you like the poster art that based out of Toronto horror artist Trevor Henderson did for the show, you can get that put on basically anything that you can think of. A hoodie, a shirt, a pen, a pillow. We've had people buy a little bit of everything. You could even just get a poster if you'd like. The link to that is in the description, as well as over at sleazoidspodcast.com. But that is the intro. Welcome back to another week. As always, I am your host, Josh Lewis, and joining me also, as always, is my co-host,
Jamie Miller. Welcome back, everybody.
Welcome. I think 2 weeks ago would have been the last time you folks over on the main feed would have heard from us, and we would have been doing a bit of an outlier episode where we were talking about Eastern European art horror, about the rise of fascism in specific countries. We talked about one, The Cremator from 1969, which was a Czechoslovakian film by a Holocaust survivor and was absolutely unhinged and psychotic.
Insane.
And had a man who really loved burning bodies and thought he was the new Buddha get recruited by the Nazis to maybe be the architect of a certain piece of machinery that you could imagine. And then we paired that with Bela Tarr's Workmeister Harmonies, which was a much
saddest
more
movie I've ever seen.
really, really bleak and meditative Hungarian film. And the pairing sounds strange, but they actually make a lot more sense to get together than you would expect. And we made that case with a friend of the pod, Perry Rulland, 2 weeks ago. That was over on the main feed. If you haven't heard that, go back and check it out. And then last week, over on the bonus feed, over on the Patreon, we talked about a very specific kind of atomic age anxiety body horror. We talked about The Incredible Shrinking Man from 1907, directed by Jack Arnold, probably most famous for The Creature from the Black Lagoon, but also from a story by Richard Matheson, who's a very famous sci-fi writer, did I Am Legend, did all kinds of Twilight Zone episodes. So we talked about a man getting very, very tiny slowly through incredible analog effects from the 1950s. That man fights a cat, and you believe that he's fighting a cat, and he's small as hell.
Takes out a tarantula. It's badass.
That's right. And it also has some ideas about sort of like where middle American men feeling inadequate were kind of at in their headspace, and rendering that through the body. And then we paired that with Tobe Hooper's 1990 film, the latest Tobe Hooper film we've talked about, but Spontaneous Combustion, which is his version of a kind of old school monster, mad scientist kind of throwback film, but updated for more of an 80s body horror gruesomeness, and has Brad Dourif setting things on fire with his mind, and people are spontaneously combusting, as you can imagine, and it is disgusting. So if you want that episode, again, patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast. That was last week's bonus episode. But moving on to this week, last week kind of teed us up a little bit because we compared Spontaneous Combustion quite a bit to a little filmmaker called David Cronenberg. And I kind of did that specifically because I knew that we had a big episode coming this week. We have a special returning guest who should be waving the belt. I think he is the most returned guest. This is number 5 or number 6. I'm actually losing track. That's how many it's been. But we have joining us, calling in over from over the pond, our Australian film correspondent, Andrew Law from the Bunta Vista Socialist Club podcast. Andrew, how you doing?
Oh, very good, fellas. How are you?
Good.
Yeah,
Glad
we're
to have
doing
you
all
back.
right.
The king has returned.
Yeah.
Yes, I am. I'm doing the. I'm wearing my robe. I'm shadow boxing.
That's right.
Up in the air. I'm happy to be here. The champ is here.
Yeah, and this was an interesting one because I mean, all of your pairings. Last time you were here, you did Steven Seagal, so this could not be further, I think, from the realm of Steven Seagal. You're always bringing on something different. So, Andrew, what 2 films have you brought with you this week, and why did you pair these 2 together?
So this week the pairing is, for some reason, I was struck by the need to do a pairing of bug films, basically. So we've got David Cronenberg's fine example of Canadian excellence, the classic remake of The Fly. And we also have Saul Bass's only feature film, 1974's Phase 4, which this is one where I think I've only done this once before on this show, but this is a bit of a gamble in that I selected a film that I had not seen yet. So because I needed to pick some movies, and I had like a bunch shortlisted, and including some of them that I hadn't seen. But as soon as I realized this one was like the only Saul Bass 70s sci-fi movie, I went, yeah, come on, that's got to be interesting.
Yeah.
And luckily, it was a very interesting to look at movie. Yeah. So I think after viewing it and reviewing them both together, I think actually the theme of the pairing has become humans becoming the bug. Humans being subsumed by the bug.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's definitely, like, both of these films are definitely stylish science fiction horror about scientists getting their insect on. But also, I was taken at how they're very different visions of mankind's, I guess, sort of post-human, more bug-like progression. One obviously being very deeply afraid of whatever the next state is going to be, and one a little bit more accepting of it. Yeah. And you might be surprised which one that is, considering David Cronenberg has, not always been someone to, he's the new flesh guy, man. He's not always completely terrified of transformation. But I was really taken with this double feature, so it kind of surprised me that you didn't totally intend it, other than obviously knowing that it had some bugs.
Just bugs.
Yeah, but no, I think on an ideas level, it also works as a double feature. So
yeah, on an ideas level, I think it really works thematically as mankind battling the bug and losing.
Yes. That's absolutely true. All right. Well, this is going to be a really fun double feature. So let's jump into it here. Let's start off with a big heavy hitter, one that we've been kind of dancing around and saving for a while, because this is our 8th or 9th Cronenberg film, and somehow we haven't talked about The Fly yet. So let's do it. Let's finally do it. Let's talk about The Fly.
No, be afraid. Be very afraid. Help me. Please, help me.
All right, we are talking The Fly, the 1986 American science fiction body horror film directed and co-written by one David Cronenberg, someone that, everyone on this show, I would assume, is familiar with. If not, you are a bad listener. Sorry to call anyone out who's like maybe a new listener, but we've talked about 7.
You're a bad Canadian.
Yeah, that's right. This is a Canadian genre film podcast. We have talked about literally 7 or 8 David Cronenberg films and his very specific brand of sexual and perverted body horror that reveals at once a deep fear of the human body and its conditions and its specific fleshy vulnerabilities of infections and deteriorations and transformations, but also through that, a more interesting kind of fascination and arousal and an inability to look away from the body and a desire to repulse others with it and to stare at it and maybe come to some disturbing truths about it. At this point in his career, because this is 1986, and we're not going to get too deep into it, but because we've covered a lot of the films I'm about to mention, but he would have done at this point Shivers, which was his kind of like big sort of I wouldn't call it a commercial debut because it was hugely low budget, but the first time he got government funding for a feature and it actually like turned a profit for the government, and there was a huge issue about that. But that one had all the sex-crazed orgy zombies that were sparked by an aphrodisiac parasite that also doubled as a venereal disease. So it was a statement, an artistic statement from the man, 1975, right off the bat, where dying was an act of eroticism, and the connection between the host body and disease was almost a romantic, liberating expression in a way. And then he would have also, at this point, done The Brood, which was a really hilarious film that was a response to Kramer versus Kramer being such a very simple drama about, a messy divorce and breakup. He thought it was too clean. He was like, no, we should have the mother and the children like being literally like torn apart. We should put in tons of perverse body horror and make it just as nasty and cruel and disturbing as possible. And then he would have hit us with the 1-2 whammy of Scanners and Videodrome, which is actually one of the very first episodes we ever did on this show. Jamie and I got to see David Cronenberg's personal 35 millimeter prints within like the first month of doing this show. And it's beautiful. You got to watch him in one case test run his ideas of sort of the flesh and the computers and psyches kind of all melded together in this conspiratorial thriller. And then see the sort of final conclusion of that idea, where a dude deeply invested in trash and lurid content and violence and sex and exploitation, he made a movie about the effect that has on him and that he's having on it by kind of progressing into the future. Rapid technology increases corporatization, this sort of lack of control and unhinged psyche and what's coming next, some kind of transformation and transcendence. There's something inside of all of us, and the TV, softcore images and snuff footage on the TV, it's going to get it out of us. But what's really interesting about Videodrome, and what makes such an interesting precursor to The Fly, because The Fly was the immediate follow-up from what I understand, is that Videodrome, absolutely top 10 of all time film for me, probably.
Oh, yeah,
partially because it's about a guy who just really loves disgusting images on TV and kind of goes down that rabbit hole. It's like, damn, my life a movie. It's the original Toronto guy movie, you know? Yeah. But that film, despite being as tangible as Cronenberg can be with the gruesome effects work and horror that he does, it's also a lot more cerebral and kind of philosophical and surreal in a lot of ways than you would expect of the guy whose most famous film is this film, The Fly. This was the first time he saw huge commercial success, and this is all kind of a long-winded way of getting to, you can see why they wanted him for this in terms of what he was capable as doing as a visual artist. Mm-hmm. But it is also insane to think about, you know, someone was making a commercial project and they were like, call up the Videodrome guy. We need a hit on our hand. We need a love story. We need, you know, this is what we need. Call him up. And that is apparently exactly what they did.
Script. You know, not just give him like a total freedom of vision, but also where the plot leads, what the characters are going to do, all of that. They gave it to him. It's beautiful.
Yeah, because the original idea was just, as Andrew mentioned at the top of the show, they wanted to remake the 1958 Fly, starring Vincent Price, which itself was an adaptation of a short story from 1957 by a man named George Langland, which all three movies basically very loosely, or all two movies, follow the basic plot of the short story, which is a scientist who creates this sort of new matter transportation device called a disintegrator/reintegrator. And they become confident enough with the results on the experiments that they experiment on themselves, moving from one side of a room to the other. But a dastardly housefly makes its way into the machine. And as a result, they create this human-fly hybrid monster that then the people around them kind of have to reckon with and attempt to fix. And the original stories have kind of different ways of doing that approach.
I was thinking making a big problem for everyone else.
Yeah, well, and also one of Cronenberg's more interesting touches, which I think he actually credits to the original screenwriter, who wasn't him. There was someone else who wrote it, Chris Pogue, and he took over and redid a draft, and he gave the guy credit on the screenplay still, because he said that screenwriter actually came up with the idea of the slow transformation.
And I think which was the larva in the hospital sequence, the nightmare sequence.
Yes, that image as well. Yes. Yeah. Which are two, you know, very, very important aspects of this film. So I totally understand, because the original short story and I think the original film, he just like immediately is like a fly monster. Like he has a giant fly for a head.
Yeah, they said like the last third was going to be him just as the monster entirely, without this, like, you know, him kind of expressing how maybe he could become the first hybrid and get a Nobel Prize and try to own it a little bit. It seemed like he was just going to become a monster.
That painful psychological transition that he has to make of realizing what's happening to him and having to watch it happen with not being able to stop it. Whereas like in the original story, they just kind of rip the Band-Aid off. They're just kind of like, yep, you're a fly man now. Find the fly so you can maybe put it back through the machine and figure all that shit out. Who knows? We'll kind of, you know, we'll figure it out from there. I mean, he's not even the original character in the short story. Apparently the main character is like his brother or something like that. And it's
like starts with him discovering the brother turning into the fly rather than the focus on the scientist.
It's not even that. It's like his sister-in-law calls him and says that, you know, like his brother is dead and he committed suicide via a hydraulic press or something like that. And there's this kind of background story of the sister-in-law. So his wife is like trying to find the fly around the house to like put it back in and see if they can like reverse it or something like that. And it has this dark, ironic ending to it where they can't find the fly, so he kills himself. And then it turns out that like the main character of the brother realized that he like killed a fly earlier that day. And like it could have been the one that they were looking for, you know, like that kind of thing. But it's a really cool story, and it gets into ideas of, you know, scientific risk and progress and frailty of the human body. And, you know, I like this idea too of a movie about a guy who turns himself into a monster, but instead of going on a violent killing spree, like kind of like what they do with the old Universal monsters sometimes, he just kind of gets really sad and suicidal.
Yeah,
and just like rots and decays.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say it's almost like in its setup, it's almost quite stagey. Like it's really something you could see being put on as a theatrical production. You know, it's isolated to a handful of locations. You know, there's a few scenes where they're outside of his sort of trendy abandoned warehouse lab. There's a few scenes
I would live
where
in that in a second.
Oh yeah,
Oh, that's so
I was
sick.
thinking.
Yeah. Coolest man cave ever.
Yeah, early in the piece when Brundle and Veronica sort of start sleeping together and she leaves again, I was like, yeah, it'd be pretty cool having like a young, sexy scientist boyfriend who's doing cool experiments in his like mad warehouse in the industrial district. But it would suck if your boyfriend started turning into a fly. That's a downside. That's a downside to the relationship.
Yeah, although it seemed like at least at first in the first few days they were having some wild and long sex, so maybe that maybe that helped at least at first, you know. It got pretty
trade-off,
bad
you know.
after that though.
There's pros and cons, but like I think like there's long stretches of the movie are what I would consider to be like quite sort of theater type staging where everything's in one set. You know, there's pretty much just the two characters interacting with each other for an overwhelming majority of the movie, other than a few scenes where, you know, another character comes in from the outside, and even then we're sort of still maintaining the location and the isolation. And I think that really sort of helps to keep the story a dynamic between people, rather than being, you know, like you're saying, Josh, the sort of universal thing of the old Universal monster thing of something happens and then now it's spilled out into the world and somebody's chasing a monster while they rampage and they're trying to figure out how to deal with the issue. Instead, this is all so contained, and it really helps in that sense to make it about the characters and their relationships with each other and how they're relating to each other as all of these changes take place.
Yeah, I mean, I love that, unlike so many other Cronenbergs, and I think the reason that this does have so much appeal, and it was, you know, the high point of his success, both you know, critically and financially, and I mean, it's the only movie he ever made that even got nominated for an Oscar, and it won it. Right. You know, like this is, without a doubt, this is the film that he is the most well known for, and I think part of that is that the early goings of this film, especially, it's surprisingly like kind of warm and romantic and a little bit even optimistic at times. Like there's this, you spend a lot of time in the joy of this budding romance and of discovery and genuine inspiration and ingenuity. And I think, you know, it's very awkward and tender and owes a lot to the fact that just Goldblum and Gina Davis have really great chemistry together. I mean, they obviously had real life chemistry together, but they are also, you know, they sell it really well on screen. I mean, Jamie and I just on the bonus transmission talked about, what was the Ben Affleck, Ana de Armas one, where they were like, that was like a real life chemistry that did not translate to the screen. And in here, you know, they sell this connection that they have for one another, which is like, you know, integral to the ideas that are going to be expressed here. Cause it's like this very, you know, there's this very romantic quality that you then have to see viciously torn apart in like a disgusting Frankenstein story. And if you don't buy the connection, then the evisceration isn't going to have the kind of tragic impact that it's meant to have. And as Andrew said, too, I think a huge part of that is Cronenberg didn't lean into some of his what can be nastier tendencies. He does by the end of the film, that's for sure. But I think in the early going, I mean, sometimes he can just be really nasty to characters. Something like Shivers, for example, where like half the characters in that movie get like raped by parasite zombies. before you even know who they are as people. In this one, you can tell that, it's very economically shot, as Andrew put. It's very, it spends a lot of time in this apartment. I mean, it's very, if you think about it, like this opens on just the meet cute and the first date and the experiment. The first time he introduces her to the experiment, it all happens in the opening like 5 minutes of the film.
I love
like it really moves, and it moves with these two, going around each other.
I love the way that he pursues her too, because it does feel like this kind of like he is nerdy, but he has a very because it is Goldblum, of course. He's got a charm to him, and I like that. Yeah, and I like that he feels like he really needs to show her this. There is obviously a level, I think, of interest that he has in her in general. But it makes me think that, he's just been in this lab by himself, isolated for so long, even before he turns into the Fly. And he's just like looking for someone to show what he's been working on. And I just love his like eagerness to get to know her and show her the things he's working on.
He has this incredible, I mean, his performance is just unbelievable in great. General. But in the opening stuff, he has this smug, childlike giddiness that is just incredibly infectious.
Mm-hmm. I think that whole opening sequence, it does such a good job of really getting his character across. And he's so well cast for this, because he has this sort of, he strikes this perfect balance for this sort of isolated scientist character, where he is like sort of charming and socially inept at the same time, which is that sort of shorthand that you would have for like the scientist who is extremely focused on their work and the thing that they've been doing. So
hasn't talked to another person in like 6 months.
All he can talk about is kind of like what he's been focusing on. Yeah.
But also, like, a lot of the time, I think one of the things that makes people attractive to each other is being passionate about things. Mm-hmm. It's being passionate about your interests or your hobbies or your career or whatever it is. I think a lot of the time, other people can see that passion and that interest, and they're drawn to it. And in his case, he's so driven and passionate about his work that you can see that enthusiasm spilling over, like you said, Jamie. He's at a point where he's going to burst. He has to share it with somebody. But he also, like, even in that opening sequence, like you said, he's also at the same time kind of showing this prideful, almost smug aspect of it, which in turn is something that's going to kind of be his downfall in the end. Mm-hmm. In the same way that in the same way that he couldn't stop himself from going out and sharing it with somebody by his own admission before it was ready to be shared. Right. That was the same impulse and the same pride and recklessness that was going to lead him to, trying to push the experiment further and faster as he went.
Right. He oversteps his own boundaries in that scene by just telling her and showing her everything, because when she starts to say like, oh, I'm going to tell people or this is a great story, he kind of realizes, oh, wait, I wasn't exactly ready for the whole world to see this thing. I just wanted to impress you. And now, you're going to use it for your own career gain, which, you can understand from her perspective. But I like that he's kind of too eager or too excited. So he oversteps his own boundaries.
Because in that moment for him, it goes from a personal transaction to a different kind of transaction that he didn't realize that he was being a part of. And it's interesting, too, because the way that it kind of builds that, that there is a more sort of personal quality to the things that they are talking about. Like, I love the moment where immediately you could tell is the Cronenberg touch, where he wants to impress her and show her how he's going to change the world, because she covers science as part of her gig for the magazine. And she's like, all you fucking scientists say that, you're changing the world. And he's like, yeah, well, they're lying. I got the real deal. And he shows her this teleportation device that he has created. And he shows it to her by asking for a personal object, something that is uniquely you, that, that you would be impressed to see recreated by a machine. And we get to a full 30-second shot of her taking her leg stocking off and giving it to him. And you get the full sex and science thing as Jeff Goldblum's like, oh, God damn, she's taking her leg is exposed.
Like, it's nice.
Yeah.
Takes a little moment to appreciate it. Yeah. I mean, I definitely
but then
he
transports it from one side of the room to the other one, and then her eyes light up, and you're like, you know, this is a, you know, there is a romantic push and pull connected to him showing off this project. But then obviously she's a journalist who writes for a science magazine, so she's like, yeah, I need to write about this.
Mm-hmm. He's like, wait. No, I wanted to show you, but not like that.
Dude, her boss. Oh my God. Stathis Borans, played by John Getz, who we actually recently talked about because we did the Coen Brothers Blood Simple.
Right.
Where he's the lead with McDormand in that. And he is, he can play scummy well.
Now, so I had this on, I was watching this and my wife was in the room as well. And, like one of the things we both sort of noted, because we've been watching like movies from our own childhoods with our kids lately, you know. One of my kids who's a bit older likes horror movies, and we've sort of been making our way through different things together, the two of us. But then we've also been sort of looking to kind of branch out with the two of them beyond just like, you know, your Disney animated movies and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
So we've also been watching things from the 90s, and recently we have watched both Don't Tell Mum the Babysitter's Dead.
I haven't seen that one.
Yeah, I haven't either.
And I think it's extremely 90s story. Christina Applegate. Good kind of 90s alternative soundtrack, all that sort of stuff. But in that movie, Christina Applegate plays like a teenager. Their single mother goes away overseas to Australia for like 2 months for a holiday. Very normal. Hires an elderly babysitter to look after her 5 kids, who immediately turns out to be both a real bitch and then just dies. So they like pop her in a trunk, ditch her on a doorstep somewhere, and then they've got the whole summer to themselves. She accidentally stumbles into a job at like a fashion house or something like that. And there is an older male character there who's a sleaze. And it is, lo and behold, John Getz. And other people of like people of my sort of age would also be familiar with him as the as like one of the sort of bad guy in Curly Sue. What's his name? Breakfast Club guy, the director. I've lost it.
Hughes.
Yeah, John Hughes. Yeah. John Hughes movie. So, and in both of those, he's very much playing the same thing. You know, he's got that same quality as like William Atherton or Christopher McDonald, where he's like extremely adept at playing a smug prick. But in this role, I was really kind of struck by, in the same way that I think Cronenberg does a really good job of humanizing both the scientist and the journalist characters, and really sort of honing in on their vulnerabilities in their affections for each other. Like, those are the things that make them do things to impress each other and stay when things are getting fucked up, you know? And John Getz's Stathis in this. This is the role for me where I've seen him in a bunch of things, and often he's playing that prickish stereotype. And in this role, he does have that, but he's quite a human character to me as well. Like, you can see that he has a really genuine concern and care for Veronica, and that at least a part of his personality is this bluster that he puts on for her. Like, you can see that a bunch of the way he behaves is just kind of, it's kind of the, pulling a girl's ponytail in the playground kind of, kind of behavior.
But he never lost it. Because he does kind of have it's like what the kind of confidence that you would get from a 19 or 20-year-old guy, you know? And he says like a lot of these strange lines with like smugness, and as if he is being funny, maybe like the one where he looks at Gina and he's like, what about sex? Just, just straight stress relieving sex. And then he puts a cigar in his mouth and
is
smiles.
that still on the table?
Yeah.
But
it seems like
that's the perfect example though, because she says, "Oh, you're disgusting," and closes the door and leaves, and he just sort of, and he has this kind of wistful look on his face and says, "Well, I wouldn't want to disappoint you," like he's kind of saying, "Well, that's our thing, that's our dynamic," And with a lot of movies from the 80s, I think that this character, this kind of trope, is like the preppy guy who is just like, I want to break you up because I don't like him because he's not me, or because I want you, or whatever, like the same for those sort of William Atherton characters, where he's always just kind of like, when William Atherton plays like the professor in Real Genius, where it's solely just kind of jealousy and nastiness that motivates a lot of stuff. Whereas in this, I think you can really see that that Stathis, while he does have that kind of, he does love Veronica and wishes that they were kind of still together in it.
Well, yeah, when things start to get a little bit more severe, he definitely has moments where, he could just be like, yeah, I'm out of here. This is too much work for me.
Yeah, and he is willing to risk his life at a certain point.
And I think but in the early goings, it's very funny to watch their relationship, because they've clearly, him and Veronica have clearly, been a thing before, but she is now sort of she had this meet cute with Jeff Goldblum's character, and is kind of interested in exploring that, but she can't he kind of just works as this casual annoyance for the film when he pops up. Like, that's his role, right, is to pop up and be like, yeah, this guy's machine sounds like bullshit. Tell him I have an assistant that's outlived her usefulness if he wants to make like them disappear for me. And he also, like, the one that strikes me is the scene where she goes home to her apartment and finds him just like showering in her apartment, like while she's out.
It shows that he's fully confident in that, and that he kind of like thinks he still owns the space a little bit.
Yeah, he's like, oh, you didn't change the locks on me? That's because subconsciously I think you want me to move back in. And she's just like subconsciously I'm just messy and lazy.
Right.
I think it's also I think their dynamic sort of gets explained at a point when Brundle is feeling a bit jealous, or a bit kind of he sort of gets the vibe that there's something between them, and that Veronica's going to be sort of taken away from him, and she explains their relationship in what is really like a very sort of realistic thing that happens a lot, and I'm sure continues to happen, which is that she explains that, she was a student at university and he was a professor. And they got into a relationship, and he got her started in journalism, and then over time he has wound up being her editor at this publication. So
there's like a power dynamic there.
Yeah, a power dynamic, and I guess also having that kind of historical relationship that started off in an exploited power dynamic and turned into something where I guess the two of them were sort of mutually benefiting from the relationship, but in a way where it's crossing a lot of lines and boundaries between personal and professional and exploitation and all that kind of thing. So,
which she's doing for round 2 technically, by mixing the personal and professional with the fact that she is sexually interested in the subject of this story that she is planning on writing, because Goldblum actually proposes to her, like, don't write a magazine article, like I'll give you full access, and like you can write a book about this thing.
Please, and he's like, just wait until I can do a living creature, and then we can start talking about releasing this information and all that.
Yeah.
Well, and to Cronenberg's credit as well, I feel like despite the nature of both of these relationships, Veronica is never sort of painted as, or described as, or accused of being somebody who like is sleeping her way to the top, or sleeping with people to get ahead or anything like that. These are just complicated human relationships that she's having.
Yeah,
totally.
No, it's very mature in terms of, you know, its romantic qualities, for sure, which is really important, because like again, like that is what when the messiness and the flaws start to arise in that and then get taken to these fleshier extremes, like that's what makes you feel
anchor.
This film, right? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
That's what makes the more genre B movie qualities of this like genuinely emotive and expressive.
And that was the thing that actually made me want to watch this movie again recently was seeing a clip from a 1986 interview with Cronenberg. It was like a Lifetime interview on the press tour, and it's weird. It looks like you know. I don't know, it looks like an Oprah interview in the 80s, you know? It's all kind of soft focus and fuzzy and warmly lit and everything for Cronenberg to talk about this sort of stuff. And here's a quote from him during that interview. He says, "It is a horror film. It's also a romance. It's a love story. It's very emotional. It's very passionate. It's not a gore fest. It's not a slasher movie. It's also very funny, not in a sense of parody or camp, but it's an ironic and darkly humorous film, I think. Gore is perhaps the most spectacular aspect of it, but it's certainly not all that there is in the movie." And I think that he really sort of makes it clear what his intentions are, and I think it really does do a fantastic job of kind of anchoring the movie, because I remember it's a stand-up comedian and doing a bit, and I cannot remember who it is. But they were talking about like it was a whole routine about things that white people stay around for in horror movies where black people would have already left, you know? Right. Like as soon as the house said "get out" in Poltergeist, you'd be like, all right, packing up my things, I'm all good. And if it is from the same bit that I'm remembering, this person's talking about, you know, she's still hanging with this guy when his ear falls off, and then she hugs him on the side that his ear fell off.
Yeah, as he's like throwing up mucus and stuff too on the shirt, and then when they hug, you have to assume that all of that got on her clothes and her skin and everything else. So there is definitely a love and a comfort with
well, and that's what's amazing is like, well, you know, we should get into, you know, like how we get to that sequence in particular, but like, that is an example of why this film is as amazing as it is, because that is such a, you know, a texturally repulsive moment where you just want to vomit. You're looking at it, you're like, why? And it, like, that's a normal response to be like, yeah, are you really gonna hug that? Do you see it? Do you feel it? Do you smell that? Like, it's disgusting.
And this is after
but at the same time,
him, like, lose teeth and he squirts his finger with pus and stuff. Like, this is
his
like,
fingernails are popping off like pogs.
A lot of things here, and then you know, she's seeing him. In even
but it's a moment
state.
of pure compassion, right?
Exactly.
It's a moment where he is begging for help and she can still see the man that she was attracted to inside the most disgusting form
and
that you could possibly lay your eye on.
The only thing that she could do at that point is hug him. Like, she feels helpless, just as helpless as he does in that scene. Seeing him deteriorate like that, like, there's nothing she can do. He says, "Help me," but like, what is she gonna come up with, you know? So
and I love just how, you know, again, like we've anchored it with the sort of like adult romantic relationships that are taking place, but then he's also interspersed some of that gruesome detail in the early scenes too, counteracting that a little bit. Like, you'll have amazing scene of Gina Davis and Jeff Goldblum with the same hair, wearing the amazing 80s clothes, having like the sweatiest sex on his pull-out couch in his warehouse lab apartment, all in one. Beautiful, like, moody lighting to it. And then, you know, then you'll have a scene of him putting his monkey through the teleporter and it coming out the other side inside out, like begging for death.
Yeah.
and then he'll do the hand gesture and be like, cheeseburger time, which is one of my favorite Jeff Goldblum isms just in his entire career.
Yeah.
Cheeseburger.
He's so good at it. He is such, I guess we already covered it, but I love him just being a very flirtatious nerd. He's very good at it. Very charming.
Yeah. But then you throw in elements like during the sex scene too, of her being like, trying to help him with his machine because his machine isn't working. That's what is the issue, is that, he's transported stockings, he's transported inanimate objects. It's working great. This is an amazing discovery. But he puts a monkey in it, it comes in inside out. There's something magical and poetic about skin and flesh and living things that he can't replicate with his cold computer. And through his relationship with her, he cracks the code because he needs,
she becomes his muse,
Yeah, and it's very interesting, like watching that happen. Of naturally, these two characters are coming together, and then you get her talking about like, let me kiss your wound better, because a chip like digs into his back, and then she starts talking about, I just want to like eat you up, and the flesh it makes you go crazy. It's why they talk about pinching baby cheeks, and then as a result, that is what has him actually realize that his computer is not, it's trying to translate flesh, but it's not actually reproducing, the kind of amazing thing about it, the human touch about it.
He hasn't programmed it in.
In my notes here, I wrote something early on which proved to be quite wrong. I wrote, this is the most Cronenberg line in the film. So he's standing around, after the monkey implosion. Yeah. And actually, just very briefly, I'll say when we're first sort of shown the telepods, I think the production design on them is simultaneously very Cronenberg. Like if you've seen things like Videodrome, there's a lot of similarity in the sorts of the how like metal is used in design. And I also
apparently it's based on the engine of his motorcycle at the time. He just thought it was like the coolest looking thing.
Oh, there you go. But I also find the telepods and a few things later on in the movie to be quite evocative of like that H.R. Geiger sort of art style.
Yeah.
Which in turn is obviously, very really evokes that sort of merging of machine and flesh and changing of bodies, So he's accidentally inverted a monkey, and he's standing around in his frustration afterwards, and she puts the camera on him and says, what's going on, tell me, talk through it. And that's the very beginning.
Yeah, people are going to want to know who the brilliant man who won a Nobel Prize, like what he's thinking in this moment, of failure.
Yeah, and
he's like, I'm thinking, fuck.
Yeah.
But this is like the first moment where I think, again, we have this kind of blurring of the boundaries where they're supposed to be, their relationship is supposed to be, she's meant to be documenting it, and he's meant to be, having his achievements. But instead, they've immediately fallen into a romantic relationship. And her role as the person who's documenting it starts to get blurred with someone who's participating in it. Because she starts to prompt him and help him think through things. And he says, during this sequence, she's like, well, what's wrong? Why isn't the computer doing this thing? And he says, computers are dumb. They only know what you tell them. I must not know about the flesh myself. I'm going to have to learn. And I was like, oh, that's the most Cronenberg shit.
Oh, absolutely.
And it turned out that there's so many more direct references.
Yeah, there's a big old monologue that he gets where what he's talking about, the plasma
core, or something. Yeah.
So after they've had sex, she says to him, I want to eat you up. That's why old ladies pinch babies' cheeks. It's the flesh. It makes you go crazy. And that gives him his little
That's the magic touch.
Inspiration. And he stands up and he says, the flesh, it should make the computer go crazy like the old ladies. I haven't taught the flesh to make the computer go crazy, so I'm going to start teaching it now. Yeah, he must teach the machine the nature of the flesh.
Gets on his analog technology and just starts entering it all in. I love it.
That's putting punch cards in,
And I love the big baboon that they got.
Oh yeah,
amazing. I mean, all three of them have incredible hair. Both leads and the monkey.
And it adds to that, like we were talking about how there is some like comedy aspects to it, and it is kind of inherently funny to watch like a naked Goldblum, grab onto a baboon and hold him just lovingly. But there is a lot of meaning to that where it's like, it's seeing the baboon go through the teleportation, and then he's feeling a connection with this animal, this living thing that, is progressing his scientific experiment. But I do love that it's still inherently funny to watch a naked Goldblum hold a monkey.
Yeah,
and say to him, "I'm sorry, I killed your brother."
yeah, for real. In the most gruesome way possible.
And so it is at that point where Veronica receives. So she's agreed to the premise. She's gonna be really involved and document this whole thing. She's gonna write the book, get the exclusive, be the journalist who documented the greatest scientific breakthrough of all time. As he says,
and her boss and editor is kind of going stalker mode. He's a little bit jealous of this.
Because again, they themselves have this complicated relationship where he sent her to the party to, find something out, and she did find something out, turned out to be huge. But his concern isn't that she might be keeping a great story to herself. The concern is that he might be losing her. So,
I'm finally onto something that's huge. His cock. That's
a classic.
What a line.
And in order to kind of exercise some control over her, to rein her in, he has sent to her at his apartment, total dick move. He has sent to her a mocked up magazine cover indicating that he's going to go ahead and publish this story about teleportation before they're ready to do. Because I presume that he knows that will torpedo her own efforts on the story.
Yeah.
And drive a wedge between her and Seth, which it does, because she won't tell him about what's going on. She, the whole thing is obviously
immediately
upset her.
This is one of the things I realized on rewatch too that I think was really special about it, is that his reasoning, his psychological reasoning behind being like, it's time to experiment on myself, is not like something that's considered or scientific. It's literally, he gets drunk and starts ranting about how jealous he is of this current sort of like possible love triangle that he's found himself in. He's like, she's going to go see her other boyfriend.
So she has an emotional reaction, which is, the boss that I have had this inappropriate power dynamic with is once again trying to exercise power over me, and it's made her very uncomfortable. And something that she says in that scene strikes me as well, which is, like we said, they meet out in the real world, and then pretty much immediately they are like sequestered away into his world,
Mm-hmm.
And like we said, there's only a couple of scenes where they go out for cheeseburger together, and he goes out to a bar later. But other than that, pretty much everything is self-contained in this location. And so she's been here with him, fucking and documenting things. And when she gets this and she realizes, I'm going to have to go and deal with this problem now. And she says to him, I still have the residue of another life, and I got to scrape it off my shoe before I can move on. So she's almost kind of saying like, I'm all the way in with you here.
Yeah.
I'm all the way committed to this thing, but I need to go and like cut ties with other parts of my life before we can move on.
Before that too, I think she says something like she suggests them going on a vacation together, and it's Goldblum's first moment of really realizing that what is happening here is a budding romance. He was obviously aware subconsciously, but it seems like a shock to him that she's actually that deep in it and interested in him.
Yeah, and the tables turn really quickly, though, because she's the one proposing this to him, which is, to him, exciting and new and everything. And then she sees the magazine cover and goes, fuck, I gotta sort this thing out.
I gotta go deal with something real quick.
And this in turn kind of, she to Seth, she would have seemed a bit cold. He sort of said, oh, I need to go immediately leave and deal with this thing. And he's like, oh, what about the vacation? What about the vacation? And she says to him, oh, don't rush it. So she's very quickly, from his perspective, done a 180 from proposing this stuff and saying, this is a romance and we're in love, to saying, oh, just back off for a second while I sort out this stuff. So it's, can
naturally you have to double down on the work, right?
Yeah. But again, I think it's a great illustration of, you have these these really messy human relationships between the three characters, where there's the overlapping between, you know, Seth's like scientific ambitions with his relationship with her, and then her journalistic ambitions overlapped with her relationship with Seth, and also her relationship with Stathis, and also her professional relationship with Stathis. So they all have all of these kind of various push and pulls at the same time, and those are the things that add the extra pressure that boils over for him. You know, he's alone. He's meant to be celebrating a successful non-inverted monkey teleportation.
Yeah, it's great.
And instead, you know, he's alone, drinking champagne and talking to his monkey. And
yeah, and he realizes, he goes, you know, I guess it's kind of cruel that I keep putting the monkeys through. You know, I shouldn't do anything. I wouldn't make you do anything that the captain wouldn't also do.
Right.
So he's like, now is the time. He's a little bit drunk. He's a little bit upset. You know, it's like, it's time to go through the machine, and the music swells. He activates it. The fog comes up, and, you know, the monkey is reaching with his hand through at him. There's a little bit of, you know, a little bit of sweetness there.
Before that point, there is a harbinger of doom, which is he's chatting away to the monkey about what the general would do, and the monkey has a very irritated look on its face as it swats at a fly that is hovering around its head.
Flies buzzing around the room. Yeah, just
I was just like, oh, as soon as that happened, I was like, there he is. There's the fly.
It's the fly.
The lead.
Yeah, I love that big kind of like spinning pan that it does too, to reveal that the fly is like in there with him, sitting on the little in the little glass window as he comes through, and as he comes out, it's really interesting too. I think it was the right call on you know, on the writing part, that both Cronenberg and his co-writer here, they went, it's so uninteresting to have this guy just pop out the other side and he is a fly man monster.
Yeah.
You know, there's not, you know, we want something a little bit more disturbing and perverse than that.
There's
and
no
what
sense
is
of
more
discovery
disturbing
or losing yourself if you do that, you know, and that's really the crux of this whole thing.
Yeah.
Well, we also get the aspect there where the audience has seen the fly. We've seen the fly, but there's a few opportunities. It almost feels like the monkey knows about the fly, but
the monkey could have warned him, but he was upset about his brother.
But yeah, then there's that. So you know, there were just those little chances in there for him to notice that something's happening, but presumably his senses are dulled by his hurt feelings and his champagne consumption, and he hops in there. He doesn't see the fly, and when he steps out, the framing of that shot, when he steps out of the machine,
it's huge.
Yeah,
naked with the mist and everything,
glistening chest.
I got a real Frankenstein, you know, standing up and coming forward for the first time. A real kind of. It's interesting that it is just him, but that's the point where they're revealing the monster. You know.
Yeah.
So yeah, the audience knows.
I also love the scene that immediately follows him coming out, where he kind of like she comes home and you know, they kind of talk through what it was that happened earlier, and he says that he went through the machine because he was drunk and he was upset, and you know, he kind of wished that she was there, but he also was still thoughtful and thought of her and still taped it for her. He's like, you know, I still, you know, you still got your story, you know, I turned the camera on when I did it.
They're very understanding of each other, which is a big thing in that scene, I think, because you're almost expecting the big fight or something, and they separate, but there's just a growing understanding that they've had, and you know,
that would be what one of those sort of like overly convenient screenplays, when they're like, we need them to fight here, we need them to get back together here. It's like, no, you like totally buy into these movie. You totally buy into these feelings that they have in this moment, and I love how physically expressed they are when he wakes up in the middle of the night. And he just starts realizing that his body is it's a little bit stronger. It's a little bit more agile. He starts doing gymnast maneuver workouts.
Oh, I love that sequence. Oh my God.
And it's 2 minutes of like her long. Waking up, hearing him, you know, heavy breathing, hearing him spin around the poles that he's doing.
He catches the
doing
fly
these amazing things. She's like, since when did the nerdy guy that I've been staying with physically capable of like doing this stuff, and she's she's so in awe of what he's capable of doing physically, and obviously so romantically involved with that as well. Right. And she just kind of sits there and watches him and is like, wow, this guy.
Yeah, I think they Cronenberg does such a great job over this segment of the movie where the audience knows that he's been spliced with the fly. He doesn't know, and all of this is starting to be revealed to these two characters over time, as both there are changes to his body that are obvious to him, and he receives as overwhelmingly positive.
Yeah, there's strengths at first. Yeah,
and then other signs start to come through that she's seeing, and he's basically blinded himself too, because he's so enthusiastic about what he sees as this new, power and vigor and verve that it's given to him. He starts, making claims to her that traveling through the teleporter has purged him and cleansed him, and he starts becoming evangelical about ever. Yeah, he starts basically sort of evangelizing about the power of the teleportation and how it's transforming his flesh and everything, to his mind, in a purely positive way. But he's like frantic about it,
I love how Goldblum's performance progresses, because obviously there's the makeup quality, but even just how much more animated his performance gets, the way that his eyes dart and the way that he does these kind of sudden primal physical movements and intense manic twitching at a certain point.
There's that whole sequence in the restaurant where he's just talking about his experiment and how he wants to progress the world, but he's doing it at 100 miles an hour. She can't even keep up with him. She's actually, I think it's the first time that she recognizes a change that she does not like and is not comfortable with. Then it just proceeds from there.
I think they do such a good job through this whole sequence of the two characters being like mirrors for each other, or just seeing the same events through two different perspectives, and how it reflects back through each character and their emotions, because you have that sort of sequence where he's realizing, that he's stronger than he was before. He has the natural agility of a fly.
Amazing.
the proportionate gymnastic ability of a fly.
That's what I'm always imagining. I'm always imagining them spinning around.
Yeah.
Peak performance.
And so, he starts to sort of realize that he has.
But also he's looking sickly too, which is interesting. His performance is getting more confident and more it's animating some of his more smug qualities that we saw in him.
But he looks diseased.
But his face is splotchier, and he's growing these strange hairs, and obviously the makeup work by Chris Wallace here, who did the creature effects on E.T., Return of the Jedi, and Gremlins. It's amazing, though, the kind of rash discolorations that they do for him, the sores and everything, and it's just very interesting, because it's not the kind of you would associate that imagery with a performance that's not as strong and crazy and bug-eyed and animated as he's going in these moments. And it creates this weird thing where she is watching this thing that this person that she has fallen in love with for all of these unique qualities, and she can still see the qualities there, but they are being compounded and poisoned by something, and it takes her a little while to put her fingers on it. It takes a little while for everyone to put their finger on it, and I think that slow, gradual transformation is what makes this more disturbing to watch. That they have to sit there and go, to the very last second, she can see Jeff Goldblum in there.
Yeah, and even when he's at 99% fly, I mean, it even ends, and we'll get to it, but it even ends with clearly he's inside. Seth is inside that body. And even until he tries to get her into the pod to create the ultimate family that's one person together, Goldblum is still there. Seth is still there, rather.
Because she's too afraid to get in because she can notice that something's wrong. Something's changed about the way that he behaves. There's something wrong, but he is furious at this idea. She's not as committed to the change, the cause as he is. You're afraid to be destroyed and recreated.
He says to her, you're just stuck on society's straight line of the flesh. I'm talking about penetration beyond the veil of the flesh. I think it's really interesting that, we don't just say, oh, he's through the teleporter and he's a monster now and he's doing a rampage.
He's going to go on a killing spree.
Instead, we really see this kind of these ups and downs and denial and acceptance as his transformation goes on, because he goes from feeling extremely energized and feeling really great and everything. And then he starts to exhibit these signs where he's growing some big, thick piano wire hairs out of his scratches in his back, and he starts to grow them out of his face, and his skin's starting to look, mottled and pallid and everything. But
he's vomiting up acid in order to eat now. His ears and body parts are falling off to what he's calling the Brundle Museum. He's like, do you want to see what I have inside the Brundle Museum? She's like, please do not show me your, But
before he gets to that point, though, he's still very enthused about the idea of transporting yourself in order to remake and rejuvenate the flesh.
Mm-hmm.
And and he's pressing Veronica to do it. He's trying to drag her over and shove her in there and say, you'll feel great too. You should do it. You should do it. And she's like, I am scared. Something obviously has happened to you. Look at your skin and everything. He's in complete denial about it.
She's like, you smell bad. Have you noticed that you smell bad?
and he because he feels so good that he's just refusing to accept any of this, And he kicks her out, and he goes out, and he finds himself a girl at the bar. He has an extremely Cronenberg sequence in which he saunters into a bar, sees these two guys arm wrestling, and he says, maybe I ought to get myself involved, to win the favor of this barfly lady. And so he arm wrestles this guy, and we can sort of see in this close up of the hand that it almost looks like he's exuding some acidic sort of substance from his hand as they're squeezing their hands together. And then with one swift movement, he snaps the dude's arm in half with a big bone coming out of the skin. Everybody's shrieking. It's a very it's an extremely Cronenberg close up held on the big bone sticking out of the arm.
Oh yeah.
And he drags this girl back to his place for more of his vigorous sex, because Veronica basically was like, 14 hours of sex straight is enough for me. I need a little break.
Yeah.
And he drags this girl back, and again with her, he's saying, "No, you need to go through too. You need to go through."
Yeah, it'll make you feel sexy. She's like, "I already feel sexy."
So Veronica comes back just in time to utter the immortal horror movie phrase: "Be afraid, be very afraid."
Right.
Yeah. And at this point, Seth throws everybody out. I don't need any of you anymore. I got it all under control. Goes into the bathroom, notices.
Even though, again, his body is partially falling apart. His apartment is like a pigsty, Well,
it's only at this point that we get a sort of demarcation in the timeline, because they don't really communicate to us in the movie how much time is passing here. I kind of get the sense that all of this has happened in the space of, say, 2 or 3 days from when he first transports himself. They have a few nights of lots of fucking, him getting more and more frantic and everything, and starting to show these signs on his skin and everything.
Of his nails and his fingers. Yeah, and then he
tosses everyone out, and he's all by himself, and he goes and looks at himself in the mirror, and he sees what Veronica could see. And he sees that his skin is fucked, and he sees that there's hairs coming out of his face that his electric trimmer can't cut. They're too thick and they're too wiry. And I think that's right, because Veronica had come back to tell him, I cut some of those fucked up hairs off your back, and I had a friend look at them, the scientist.
And they weren't human.
They're not human
and
hair.
he
He thinks
denies
they're
it, I
insect hairs. Something happened, and he's like, shut up, get out. And then he goes and looks at himself, and he realizes...
While pacing around, and like my favorite aspect is his sugar craving, which is always just casually involved in the scene. Like it's
he's
never
got, like Fruit Loops
really
and Captain
remarked
Crunch
upon
everywhere.
entirely. Yeah, but like he's pacing and angry and yelling at her while just devouring a chocolate bar, like disgustingly.
And so it's only at this point when he goes into the bathroom and he can see what Veronica sees, and he's biting at his fingernail, and suddenly all of his fingernails are coming out, and he's shooting pus all over the mirror, and he can't cut his
effects
facial
work
hairs.
is so tactile and
disgusting.
so physical and ugly.
And then,
oh my god!
And then this is the only point in the film where we feel like we get a demarcation in the timeline. We've basically had the two of them meet. They have a whirlwind romance. They have not even a fight, but it prompts him to put himself through the teleporter. They have a few days or a few nights of him starting to look like something's wrong. He's thrown Veronica out, and then he realizes what's happening. And he has the realization of someone who's just been told that they have like stage 4 cancer, you know? Mm-hmm. He's just like, oh no, I realize that something's gone terribly wrong. And so then we get some kind of gap in the timeline. And when Veronica comes back again to see him, this is when he's like, 80% of the way to fly. This is when he's puking on things and digesting them, and he's lost all his hair, and he's talking about how his teeth are basically useless now. And he seems to have, he's walking around with walking sticks, and he seems to have basically accepted that his fate is to just decompose into a fly and die. But as he gets more flyish, he starts to almost kind of go, well, is there an alternative? And he starts asking his computer some questions, about, well, how do we solve the problem of there being too much fly in Brundle? And the computer says, oh, throw another pure human in there and take the ratio down. And this is what kind of catapults him on his final last-ditch effort to save himself by pulling someone else into the telepod with him.
Yeah, well, and I like how much time it has us sit in this section of the film where he just is like this walking, vomiting tumor, essentially. Because it gets to this sort of, Cronenberg aspect of, he's very terrified of the body deteriorating and the aging process and death. And you throw in a little bit of, a lot of people read kind of like the AIDS crisis into a little bit too. And with this idea of it possibly the fears of it spreading through infection as well. Both of them are actually afraid of that. Like he's afraid of spreading it to her. She at one point is very terrified of this idea that she had sex with him and got pregnant, and that she has these psychotic dreams of giving birth to a giant sort of like maggot parasite looking thing that the doctors literally deliver in the vision, covered in blood and everything, and like
Cronenberg
that.
That's Cronenberg, like right? It's going to be like it's going to be part of the plot too. Like he kind of sinks into that hospital sequence for a little bit before he reveals the big fly larva or whatever it's called. So I really like that he sinks into that.
So he does these gross out moments of just extreme disgusting horror, and then also, again, by making this transition so slow and so psychological that, we spend so much time with Goldblum still performing inside this makeup. I mean, I think they had to do like 6 stages of makeup effects and creature work in order to make this work. But he stays performing as an actor and being emotive for a lot longer of this film than you would anticipate. And a huge part of that is that, one, what Andrew was pointing out, that, he starts to try and wonder, is there a new kind of reality I could form like this? But then also you get to see her, Gina Davis's really painful reactions to watching someone she loves deteriorate right before her eyes. Like, it's like it's a real-time terminal illness experience, but like his body parts are falling apart and he's like begging her for help and she's hugging him. That's why it's I think that moment where she hugs him despite his disgusting form is like just one of the most moving gestures in the film, because everything about the way that it's textured and the way that it looks intentionally is like, you want to recoil, you want to back away, you want to just blow lock the door, blow this up, get it over with. And she instead is there trying to do something about it, even though she's watching him vomit up corrosive enzyme and liquefying his food and sucking it back up. I love the shot of the boss, Stathis or whatever, watching the tape that she shot of what the new form Brundlefly. Yeah. He's like, oh my God. Like, just incredible footage. He can't look away from it, but it's disgusting.
And every time she goes
Cronenberg
back,
in a nutshell.
He's just 10 times worse. So that, like, there's a real emotional weight there where every time she returns to that apartment, she knows that she's not going to even see the version of him that she saw previously, let alone who she met
his
at the party.
His teeth are falling out. Yeah. Artifacts of a bygone era, he calls them, as he's disintegrating. He's constantly like licking and twitching. And
and then as it goes, convincing himself that this is actually a very progressive move for humanity, and that he could be the first, hybrid bug human politician and bring the species together and just some absolutely wild shit. But he's trying to kind of understand his new identity and be like, well, what could I bring to this world? Because he doesn't quite know yet how far that deterioration is going to go.
Well, yeah, because he's confronting her with the knowledge that, you've never heard of insect politicians because, they don't have them. They're completely brutal. They have no compassion, no compromise. You can't trust them. And he'd like to be one, but he delivers probably the line of the film. I'm an insect who dreamt he was a man, but the dream is over and the insect is awake.
Oh, man.
And he is essentially saying that the insect form of him is winning, that he is being exited from his body, and his, sort of cold decision making, which could be to hurt her, is basically imminent if she doesn't leave, and she needs to leave. And
I'll
it's the most perverse like breakup scene that you've ever seen in a movie, of like a fly man saying, yeah, sorry, I can't stop myself from going fly mode on you. Yeah. So you're going to need to go for a middle of the night abortion real quick.
Yeah. And yeah, we get from the dream sequence of her being pregnant and going to get an abortion and having to deliver this giant writhing larva.
Disgusting.
To her then, seeing him at his most advanced stage yet and leaving. Stathis is waiting outside for her, and she's frantically, manically insisting on an immediate abortion, basically.
Yeah.
And
I need this like out of me.
Yeah, after seeing him,
yeah. I cannot have this inside my body. And they go to somewhere that Stathis knows about, with a doctor who will perform an abortion, and keeping in mind that it's 1986, I guess. And, he can't understand what the big hurry is, and they have to try to tactfully explain that the father of the pregnancy is a very deformed man, and they have reason to believe that the baby will also be deformed. And at this point, this is by far the most kind of traditional monster movie thing that happens.
This is what I love, is that all the setup is not like this, but by this point in the film, it is full creature B-movie. Like Jeff Goldblum, giant fly man, looking like the Hunchback of Notre Dame, bursting through the wall like the Kool-Aid Man and pulling her out.
Like he's a super villain at this point.
And he's like, why do you want to kill Brendel? It's like, it's the only thing left of me, and you're going to like kill it. And, he's like very upset about this idea.
I do kind of feel like, obviously I understand Gina's point of view, but I do kind of understand and have sympathy for him in that mind state, just because he knows that he's turning into
losing his battle, right?
Yeah, and he's kind of like, well, maybe this baby will be the last remaining thing of me, Seth. Rather than
not just him, but them, right? Of like this thing that we shared together. Now that I can't, that I can't be part of that anymore.
Yeah, and so there's like such a sadness there. But obviously, I would say, Gina, do what you need to do in that circumstance.
I think that we can kind of see in his progression that, again, it changes from like how can I fix this? How can I get back to myself? And he asks the computer, "Oh, what happened? Did I assimilate the fly?" And the computer says, "No." Computer says, "No, sorry." It turns out
we just kind of splice you together, you know.
Yeah, you have
things happen.
You have fused at like a genetically molecular level, and that you're just going to become, half of one, half of the other. So he sort of goes from trying to fix that problem to trying to ameliorate the problem to, at a certain point, what he's trying to do is like preserve some aspect of himself. He's just trying to preserve some aspect of his own DNA. When he gets to that point of, let's fuse ourselves into one family. And so in that scene where he busts into the abortion clinic and says, "Oh, how are you going to do this?" You can really see it aligning with the pattern of thinking that Brundlefly is in at this point, which is, I'm just trying to preserve some aspect of myself to be left behind. Yeah. I'm just trying to keep any sort of example of my DNA alive.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's interesting is that, these are things that, as Jamie mentioned, like you sympathize with and you've been primed to feel them as it transitions into a very extreme, almost action finale used as an expression of these feelings, which is really amazing. Where like the editor shows up to the lab with a shotgun, being like, he just kidnapped Gina, who I was trying to help her get her abortion, and it turns into this whole thing where he's trying to shove her into the pod to combine the two of them and the baby all into, one being where they can live together. And, again, proposing this idea of a new form of, living, of personhood of some kind. But in order to do that, he has to do these really disgusting acts of inhuman acts that you wouldn't have thought him capable of at the beginning of the movie, like vomiting acid onto John Getz's hand and melting it to the bone and doing the same to his ankle.
I love that it foreshadows that a bit we already mentioned it, but when he's looking at it on the TV, when Gina presents it to him, and then later on he's seeing it just being
happen to his own body parts.
Leg. Yeah. It's
and at this point the makeup effects for him are going to the point where I think the makeup effects artist described it as he was like the Brundlefly, the Brundle thing. He went from the Brundlefly to the Brundle thing.
The only thing left essentially is you can kind of see Goldblum's face a little bit in this version. Because the final version is when, he's grabbing onto Gina and dragging her to the pod, and his whole face just crumbles off, and then there's nothing left of Goldblum at all.
That's the craziest part is when, like you can still see him in there, even though he's kind of like the beast he's completely beastly at this moment and doing beastly actions. But then his jaw like falls off and his hairy legs start bursting through like the skin of his shins,
and they become
his
like hind legs.
His fly head rips through his human one. Yeah. Like it's so sticky and gooey, and you can hear the tearing of the skin and see how wet and hairy he is. Like the final monster here is just like really impeccable. And I know it was like a puppeteered thing at that point, but it was just, the way that they built it and transitioned it's seamless.
Yeah. You still believe that Goldblum's inside there. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, and he ends up putting himself through the machine thinking that he's got her in there, but, Stathis shotguns the one pod so it's not connecting her, and he basically just transfers just himself through, and also because of the way that it was disconnected with also the machine and the technology. And so at that point, he comes out the other side just like this fly-infused, mangled animal that's completely mortally wounded, and also combined with like wires and steel and trying to drag himself over.
This is the other moment.
Go ahead.
This is the other moment for me where it's a particularly Geiger-esque bit of production design when like Brundlefly is dragging itself out of the pod, fused with metal, dragging cables behind it. Has a bit of that sort of visual vibe of both like Geiger and like Tetsuo the Iron Man kind of stuff.
Yeah,
absolutely. That sort of pipe and hose kind of hanging out of the back of him as he drags himself along the floor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then the perversity of looking at that and going, essentially she has to put him down like a dog out back. Like he drags the shotgun over to his head with his big greasy claw, and he's like, please, like, kill me.
That's the saddest
and the
part
perversity
is that, like, Cronenberg
just like
doesn't have him, just become, even after that transformation, he does another transformation. He still is inside him, because he's
in
making
there.
that conscious decision to be like, you know what, I have gone too far. Please take me out. And it's one of the saddest things in the world, just because Gina, at first, he is kind of coming at her as a monster, and Gina is crying and like, I have to kill him.
Has
and then
the gun,
she stops,
but she can't do it.
And
yeah,
he's the one that says, no, you need to do it. Not her. Like, it's not her being defensive or anything like that. It's just a moment of, I guess you could say, mercy. And it's just one of the saddest, most heartbreaking endings I've ever seen.
Well, and it ends on this moment of someone you love is no longer the thing that you loved anymore, and it's begging you for help, and that help is shotgunning its fucking head to pieces and chunks flying.
It's such
so
a good
meaty.
effect.
Oh,
It's so good.
It's too good.
And it has that effect happen, and then ends on her just screaming and crying and the lights fading to black. And you're like, yep, that's just one of the most tragic, like, breakup movies that you've ever seen in your life.
5 out of 5.
It's unreal. But we should be pivoting, I think, over towards the reductive rating around here, which it probably is clear from the way that we've been talking about it. This one is a pretty easy 5 for me.
Oh, yeah.
I just think it's a perfect combination for Cronenberg of things that you wouldn't expect him to do, because, he kind of thought of himself as a very, John Carpenter didn't like talking to him very much because he found David Cronenberg very pretentious. And you can tell in a lot of his films, he's about the ideas and he's doing something deeper and more meaningful.
Right.
And it was very interesting for me to see all of his career-long proclivities about the body and about technology and about sex reworked into a very commercial package that he was brought into, where he combines absurd creature B-movie stuff. He totally is invested in this genuinely mature and romantic love story at the center of it. You get involved with these characters in that way, and then buy into the absurd physicality of the makeup effects, which makes you then viscerally feel, the things that he's terrified of and intrigued by. And it's a real miracle. It has the fear of the flesh and the poetry of it, the warm connection of two people being brought together and in love, but then also, sort of like the more flawed elements and the sicker elements, and then eventually just the absolute tragic evisceration and destruction of the body in the finale. And he addresses things like terminal illnesses and cancers and aging, and this feeling that your body is betraying you and you are morphing into something else, and how that just all ties into the sexual and romantic angle and fears of infection and stuff like that is just it's really gruesome and intelligent stuff, and very deeply felt. It's absolutely his most emotionally tragic film outside of, like, maybe Dead Ringers.
Yeah.
Without having to sacrifice how sort of B-movie goopy and unsettling that he can be in his other best work as well. So yeah, for me this is 5.
Yeah, 5 out of 5 for me too. Just incredible effects, top notch, great direction, amazing performances. I think the tragic ending is suitable for the story that's taken place. I really do feel this one by the end. I mean, watching Gina just having to kill Seth and break down, and that's how they choose to end too, with no other little plotting or anything like that, or a character moment, just left with a love that was destroyed. And it's fantastic. You probably have seen it, but if you haven't, please go watch it. 5 out of 5.
Yeah, for you, Andrew.
It's a big 5 out of 5 for me as well.
Hell yeah.
Yep. I think, like you're saying, Jamie, when it sort of gets to the end and just sort of ends immediately, I think it's a nice reflection of the way that the movie starts with the two of them coming together.
Yeah.
We take a break.
And then apart.
Well, yeah, we take, like, the only point where the timeline shifts in the movie is when the two of them aren't together, or like, sort of immediately apart and together again. It really is just a love story of the two of them. It's very tragic. Very beautiful, very gross.
Without Cronenberg, this would still be a very good movie about just watching someone change and transform and into something else, and just the sort of tragedy of having to watch that happen in real time and watch it, but then having Cronenberg there to physically represent that for you in the most extreme way possible, just I think makes it that much more impactful and brutal.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that'll wrap it up, I think, here for The Fly. We're going to be right back. We're going to be talking about Phase 4. All right, we are back and we are talking Phase 4, the 1974 science fiction horror film directed. Was this written? No, written by Mayo Simon and directed by the legendary graphic designer Saul Bass. We've actually talked about him.
Inspired by H.G. Wells' Empire of the Ants short story as well. I see.
Yes, which is, it's a story of a boat captain who's like called to assist a village in the upper Amazon where they're fending themselves off from like a plague of ants who turn out to be kind of like hyper intelligent and militarized and poisonous. And they end up killing like tons of people and essentially end up working as like this colonial force heading towards Britain. And that's like basically how the story ends. It's just it ends with the horrified idea that they're coming.
Yeah. Have you guys watched the 70s movie Empire of the Ants? I haven't seen it.
No, I have not.
Okay,
but I'm curious to see how it differs, because I was really intrigued by Saul Bass's version of this, which is definitely is a horror story, and it has fear, and it's definitely afraid of the ants, but it also has this thing that makes it, I think, suitable to being a Cronenberg double feature pairing, which is that it has this kind of mind-bendingly curiosity to it. It's kind of open.
A lot of focus on the ants and the colony and their interactions, and like there's even a part where they're mourning some of the ant deaths and stuff like that, like lining them up as a funeral, like soldiers. So I like that they kind of they focus on the ant colony and don't just make them this like scary creature. They kind of bring an understanding to them a little bit.
There's this societal transformation, definitely, that he is more intrigued and interested in accepting of than you would expect of someone else who were to adapt this into like a monster movie,
right?
Straight up.
Just on Saul Bass for a second, like obviously, people know his graphic design from movies like West Side Story and Goodfellas, Casino, Cape Fear, Psycho, lots of extremely iconic things.
He's come up so many times on this show with us. We've covered Vertigo, Psycho, Seconds, Grand Prix, Casino, Goodfellas. Like we've mentioned him a dozen times on this show just because he's done like the title sequence or the poster or something. Like he did the poster for The Shining as well. He's an incredible visual artist.
Well, this is something I did not know, is that he's also responsible for designing like some of the most iconic logos in North American history. The Bell telephone logo, the AT&T logo, Continental Airlines, United Airlines. Geffen Records. Hanna-Barbera, the Quaker Oats Company, Warner Communications, Kleenex.
Holy shit. That's crazy.
Girl Scouts of the USA. Yeah, this dude has done some incredibly iconic graphic design. So like really
whether you know him or not, you have seen his visual art in some capacity in your life. And apparently he got really into that and got into specifically title sequences and posters and stuff, because he loved this idea of, he did all these corporate logo work, but he was really intrigued by the idea of pure images generating mood for an audience. And he loved the idea of someone coming to him with like, here's the feeling I want an audience to have leaving this film. How can I do that purely through, like visual design. And so, yeah, that's how we got into doing those opening sequences.
Yeah.
Like, I think about seconds, the opening stuff to seconds. I think about that shit all the time. The way that it's fractured and distorted and just so unsettling. Unreal work.
I guess there's another aspect that makes his work really distinctive, which is that, it's
very
not
stripped down and minimalist.
Yeah, and it's not just about an expression of mood. Like, I think what you've just described is that his work really, really forms a part of the film. Like, it's not kind of something just sort of appended to the front and the back. Like, often it's this real sort of mood setting, communicates things to you about the plot of the movie and the nature of it. There are some things where like some of his work was like animated prologues and epilogues to the movies that are in there. It was stuff that I think really formed part of the overall creative vision and narrative of the film, as opposed to just kind of, we made a movie and then an agency did a poster for it or a logo or designed a title card. It really is a part of the film in a way that it's clear he's a creative collaborator of the director.
Yeah. Well, and that makes it really intriguing that this was his only feature directorial outing. And from what I understand, it basically occurred by total happenstance. That he this movie, they basically like improvised this movie on the spot because Saul Bass had a producer friend who was dining with the head of Paramount one night, and the guy turned to him and asked him what he was working on. And instead of saying, I got nothing. I got nothing. He said, an ant movie? I had no idea why he had ants on his mind, but he said that he's working on an ant movie. And the Paramount guy
calls up Saul.
Yeah, for whatever reason, the Paramount guy was like, I'm kind of interested in an ant movie. Tell me more about this ant movie. So then he calls up Saul Bass, who just happened to have friends who both were in nature photography and also had a friend who was like a legitimate expert and worked with ants. And then bam, they had a movie underway.
That's so funny.
Was the thing that killed me when I was reading about it was it said, Raoul Radin called Bass, who had a friend who worked with ants.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Like so very 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 like New York. Oh, I've got an ant guy. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me call him up.
My goodness.
We'll get something cooking. Let's look up stories with the word ants in the title.
But I'm glad
and
they
we'll
did.
See what we got.
I mean, this guy knew what he was doing. He was some of the shots that they get in this to tell the ant story itself is pretty unbelievable. Like some of the first things they show is the ants kind of progressing in intelligence and learning to communicate with one another. And they do these close-ups where each faction of ant has like a symbol on their forehead as they're talking, and then they create these giant
they're meeting, they're making decisions, they're starting a society, they're creating hieroglyphics and monuments and
which is the coolest part, just because I mean, I don't know how they would do it obviously, but they would film what the ants were doing and then apply it to the story as it went, and it was very cool.
This
the way
is
they applied it.
Best performances by ants that you've ever seen in a movie.
Absolutely.
100%. Because these are real macro photographed ants doing the things that you're seeing in this film, and tying that footage to like this microscopic footage to something that feels more cosmic. Like the literal opening sequence of this completely evokes like 2001: A Space Odyssey. Like it's beautiful formations of stars and lights and shapes and planetary objects, and it tracks this cosmic event that has sparked this change, the quote unquote the change that is happening to these ants. And in the narration they say like astronomers argued over theory and engineers got excited about variables in the magnetic fields and mystics predicted that earthquakes and the end of life as we know it were coming. But what really happened was a bunch of ants got brains.
It's kind of like in that sense it shares qualities with both your classic horror movie setup of like Night of the Living Dead, a comet went over and some stuff went weird and that kind of thing, but also like Night of the Comet type stuff. where it's just there is an otherworldly factor at play, and something has changed, and this is what it is. But I also felt like the setup of the movie follows that kind of classic science fiction, like epistolary sort of setup, like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, where it's sort of being communicated through excerpts from reports and pieces of research, and it's like a faceless narrator reading out to us. This is what happened initially, and this is what we're observing in this report. And people thought it was just something to watch. They didn't know what was going to happen.
Yeah, in that way, it kind of reminded me too that the way that we eventually kind of get trapped with the characters experiencing this thing that's going to have larger implications. You spoke of Romero. I thought about the Crazies. Quite a bit. Not just because of the giant suits that they're wearing that are terrifying as well. But yeah, that was something I thought about. I thought a little bit about Altered States, Ken Russell's Altered States, with the sort of psychedelic elements and how kind of surreal and terrifying, but kind of strangely beautiful and blissful this film is about this eventual future ant-dominated world that's taking place here. But I do love that so much of this is just getting you into the world of the ants, as Jamie put it, like just this macro photography of them walking along crystals and dirt and observing their pincers and moving with them like they are operating on like some sort of alien planet that's like just beneath our feet.
I also like the way that they light certain aspects of the colony. Like when they get to the queen, they give her this like flashing blue light. It feels just very much like what we'd see in something like a science fiction movie or something like that. And obviously, I guess because they kind of use that imagery in this film, but the queen itself reminded me of Aliens when she's giving birth to all the eggs and of the other aliens. So it was cool to see that just on a microscopic level and using real insects.
Another aspect to this film that I thought was kind of interesting, and it gives it a really different tone to a lot of other movies, both from this era and about this sort of topic, because it does occupy a kind of strange space, between the kind of the sort of pulpy sci-fi of the 50s and 60s of the kind of giant ants from the desert sort of thing,
psychedelic
tarantula
nature of the 70s.
And so it's sort of stuck between that and between like the sci-fi blockbusters of the end of the 70s, starting off with Star Wars and the whole wave of sci-fi movies that kicked off. Right. And it's sort of in this weird middle ground between those things. And what I was kind of struck by is that the tone of the film is that it basically begins by saying, "You're fucked." Like this is happening. This is how the world died. Is kind of the vibe at the beginning. It's sort of the world is doomed. This has happened. The person who is sort of speaking to you voicelessly at this point is just acknowledging that this has happened, and they're telling you this is how it happened. So we're kind of locked into this mode from the very beginning of the scientists involved here and the planet essentially are doomed.
Yeah.
So we're not really suffering under any illusions here that there is a chance for the scientists that we're kind of going on this journey with are going to win, or that there's going to be any kind of solution
totally
to what's happening.
We're totally here just to sit in the filth of this biological imbalance that has taken place, and also to experience sort of like the last minute sort of like death psyche freak out experiences that people are about to have when faced with their own, impending doom that they are about to experience.
Yeah.
And I think that he walks a really interesting balance of like really, really tactile macro photography that's incredibly grounded in these real physical objects, and then applying also these very sort of experimental and atmospheric visual and sonic touches to it that make it feel unreal at times, and this, so it totally captures this bizarre biological happenstance that is taking place, and we have already lost to, even though we're just watching the characters kind of rage against something that they have to accept.
I like the way they introduce the ants as well. Like the one of the first things we also see is them having a giant battle and them killing each other. But then we see them also communicating and watching over the human beings that show up through the towers and all of that. And it kind of gives
start taking down spiders and mantises and millipedes, like disobeying the laws of nature.
Yeah.
In these amazing time lapse photograph sequences of them, just killing bigger and bigger animals to the point where eventually they're killing like, bunnies and sheeps and horses. Like, it's crazy.
Yeah. And they have both aspects where clearly the ants are capable of killing, but they're also capable of communicating and working together. And unfortunately, the first thing that the humans do, specifically Hubs, the guy that kind of gets a little crazy, he takes a little mini grenade launcher and destroys all of the towers to get
the
a
little
rise
monuments
out of them.
that they've built.
Yeah, and at first you would think, and James, the other doctor, who's more trying to just get on their wavelength, try to communicate a little bit because he sees that they're progressing in intelligence. And I just think the ants were probably going to inevitably take over. It seems like that's the case, but it also seems like they would have been more. It would have been an agreeable thing for them to work with us if it weren't for Hubs just kind of jumping the gun to get their research going by grenading all of their towers and basically creating a battle from the very beginning.
Mankind as an aggressor, Jamie? Is this what you're trying to say to me?
That's right.
What?
That's right.
I don't know.
To keep it
I don't know if I believe it.
Yeah, it is interesting the setup, how we sort of go from saying we're aware of this thing happening in the desert, like essentially the other thing that's interesting with how the film is broken up is that the movie is phase 4, and the movie begins by saying phase 1.
Oh,
and giving us this sort of
just like The Fly, there's stages.
Yeah.
This is a slow, gradual transformation into a new type of living.
Yeah, and so tonally it is quite different because in The Fly we have stages, but we travel with the character as the character is okay at first and has all of this potential to change the world and have great achievements and everything. And then something goes wrong, and we travel along with them as they realize that they are completely without hope and everything. Whereas this movie kind of opens by saying, there is no hope. This is how we got to where we are. And phase 1 is basically the stage where, there is a threat growing. And some of these scientists are kind of aware that something's happening, and they've gone out to where it's happening to sort of observe and assess the situation. So
because farmers in the area are leaving because of their crops and their livestock and all of that, I believe.
Like cows and horses getting killed by ants, and there's all these
small holes buried into their bodies that they can't quite explain.
And the holes look like kind of they're the sort of gauge of a drill hole through a piece of wood kind of thing, often in sequences of 3, like an ellipsis. And so there's these two scientists, Lesko and Hubs. I can't remember the name of the actor who plays Lesko, but we all know him as the mayor from Batman Returns.
That's right.
And Hubs. And so Lesko's deal is that he is
isn't the mayor... oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm getting it mixed up. I was thinking that was Watkins.
Yeah, Michael Murphy. He's also in Magnolia and McCabe and Mrs. Miller, and he's been in quite a few things.
Right. Continue, Andrew. Sorry.
So Lesko is like a sort of game theory and language guy.
I do love that it's the game theory expert. They were like, we need you to interpret these geometric statues that the ants have built and the crop circles and all of this, and also start working on a way to translate and communicate with them and find figure out some way. So he's meant to be the peaceful observer coming in to just find out what's happening and start trying to bridge some sort of communication project with them, whereas James he's James Lesko. Hubs is the other guy.
Yeah.
Hubs is a more extreme character. And he has kind of a more hidden, sort of angrier agenda that he doesn't kind of reveal until later in the film. But he is a lot more brutal and a lot more, this is just another desert development that didn't develop. So fuck it and fuck these people. And
yeah, and we also get the sense, like, I mean, I think we get the sense pretty quickly that Hubs has more of a sense of what's going on. And he's not, he has like more of a sense of, you know, the ants are hostile. The ants are hostile.
He thinks the takeover is nothing but a negative thing for the human race, right?
Yeah, they're hostile. They are building power, and we're here to kind of act as a barrier to them. Whereas he's not making Lesko very aware of this stuff. He's being quite cryptic. You know, he seems like he's hiding something. So Lesko, on the other hand, is just like, oh, well, you know, let's see if we can have a chat with the ants. And like you said, there's been this formation of like very 2001-esque monoliths in the desert. They're all these sort of geometrical diamond-shaped things with an offset notch in them at the top. And everybody else in this valley has cleared out except for one family who stayed behind, and they don't want to leave. I would note at this point that this is like pretty early in the movie, and during the whole opening sequence where the soundtrack was going on and everything, I immediately purchased a copy of the soundtrack on vinyl.
Nice.
Oh, it's incredible.
So I was like, this shit goes really hard.
Also to hear like synth work this nuts in like 74, because like previously to this, what was the most popular was like a Clockwork Orange probably. Mm-hmm. So like, I mean, like this is way before synths were like the norm for this kind of film.
Yeah, and even then the synth stuff in like Kubrick movies was often, you know, playing an interpretation of an existing piece of music.
That's true too.
As opposed to doing this sort of like very atmospheric stuff. I mean, the only sorts of other things I can really think of are usually confined to like, you know, prog bands.
Every 80s crime drama.
Or like I'm thinking particularly of like prog bands doing soundtracks for like
Goblin
like
is something that was operating around that time.
Yeah, so very, very, very cool atmospheric soundtrack and everything. So at this point, we transition into phase 2, and this is where the scientists are trying to communicate. You know, so they're trying to do a bit of chatting back and forth. But it's also at this point, I think, where we really ramp up Bass, like trying to give the ants a narrative as protagonists in the movie, like almost equal to the humans. Because there's a point here where, you know, that I think it's around the point where some of the family are still around, and they're going door to door telling locals who are still there, like, they got to get out. Like they don't know it yet, or at least Lesko doesn't know it yet. Hub seems to know it, but they're about to go to war with these ants, and they know that, you know, these farmers already kind of, we're seeing detail about how they are having to adjust their process to the existence of these ants anyway. Like there's this whole reveal where like the ants are there to get revenge on the monument breaking that Hubs did to try and activate them and, you know, try and bait them into, you know, actually coming forth so they can start this communication. And they start killing the farmer's horse. You can hear the horse screaming, and the granddaughter is there freaking out and screaming. And they previously told them that they should leave, but they said, no, like, this is all that we have. We're going to stay here. And there's this amazing sequence where like it's pitch black at night. It's void, like these ants are just murdering this horse. And you can just hear it screaming. They light up that fire moat that they have there, which is there to clearly they've installed that to prevent the ants from like getting further into the property. And also the ants were actually seeing like their military tactics. Right. Like they're riding along on the little like boat, on the little like plank of wood down the river to get there and everything like that. It's very interesting.
show like the floating of the ants that are on the wood piece, and then they show it kind of hitting the ground so that they can all move out into the field to get to the horse. Like every military step is shown visualized, and it's awesome.
It's like you're watching a boat deliver a bunch of foot soldiers to a battlefield.
Like watching, when they're sneaking into the base in Apocalypse Now, like their heads are rising above the water. It was just very cool to see like this army of ants do it. And once again, it's just the authenticity of using the real insects just adds such a cool little nature
and then
film
splicing
vibe
that like the way that this uses again sort of like the experimental editing patterns, and then also creates a sense of scale out of it, where like you're seeing images of these ants pulling up like they're about to go to war, and then you get this close up of this horse just freaking out, and you're putting it together in your head that the ants are starting to go through its body, like the sheep earlier who has the holes in it and stuff like that. So like, he doesn't have the budget to show you ants biting through a horse's stomach, but you kind of have an idea on what it is that's
and we've already seen them deteriorate like the spider, and eventually we see it do like a field mouse or something like that. So we kind of have an idea at least of what they're capable of. So even when you're seeing the horse freak out, you still have a visual in your head.
Well, and the pure chaos of the imagery of just like the fire raging in the background and all the people running around and eventually getting in the car, and the car eventually crashing and exploding because they operate like a chain and basically like eat their way through the engine of the car and stuff like that too, which is, like these are really intelligent, organized ants. And the only reason they're lashing out and doing this to anyone is because Hubs destroyed their symbolic, possibly religious monuments that they were building, and they were like, "What the fuck?"
Yeah, like, bro, this was just art. Like, we're just, we're expressing ourselves, and you come up with a mini grenade launcher. Come on now.
Yeah. So the only thing these scientists have done is piss the ants off. Started getting them killing people, and even then not actually being the ones to kill the people. It was actually the scientists' chemical weapon that they unleashed.
It's just
like
the ants.
Yeah, the crystallized sort of like yellow gas that they send out to them.
Thick too.
This leads to like a very visually striking sequence as this stuff is raining down on both the ants and the people who are left there.
Mm-hmm.
And people are just getting
it shows the suffering of the people and the ants equally, which I find very interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, and this leads to like this really interesting sequence that again goes a long way to sort of communicate the intelligence of the ants to us, which is that after this has happened, we've got all of these like ant corpses fused into this yellow stuff that's caking the entire landscape, right? And we get all these shots of basically like a massive ant graveyard of all of these things sticking out. And then
and the scientists walking around in their suits, like looking at them and stuff like that.
Yeah, and so one ant pops up out of this hole and grabs a chunk of the poison and drags it back down into the ant nest, and we get this sequence where again, real macro photography of a real ant. And I was really struck by how this managed to actually be quite affecting, where this singular soldier ant is dragging this chunk of yellow poison down like a sort of shaft in the ant's nest. And at a certain point, it becomes weak because it's being killed by the poison that it's dragging along. And then it dies and collapses onto the lump of stuff. And at this point, another solitary ant comes out, pushes the first dead ant off the lump of poison, and then continues dragging it further down. Then this ant succumbs to the poison. And then another ant, just a single ant, comes out, knocks the other corpse off, picks it up and drags it in. And through this
perfect division of labor is how
right.
The scientists who observe this behavior end up describing it. Perfect altruism and self-sacrifice and harmony.
And they do this in order to drag the poison down to the queen, which eats it and then starts giving birth to a new kind of ant which has been immunized against the poison.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
So yeah, you can see this whole sequence where they're able to they're able to adapt to what's happening. They can recognize what's happening, but much like Brundlefly said, they have the cold calculation of insects and the willingness to sacrifice individuals in order to triumph. And so you've had all these ants make the sacrifice of their own lives in order to like immunize a whole new bunch of ants. And those ants go on to build new structures which are another form of weapon. These ants build, they build these new structures which are covered with like a crystalline surface on top, directly positioned in order to reflect sunlight onto the dome tent that the scientists are now stuck inside, essentially just over time starting to bake them inside the thing.
Yep. And their technology,
make them go crazy,
using,
heat them up. Frog in the pot experiment.
Right. And the computers that they're using at a certain temperature, they'll stop working, so they can't do further research and really survive in that lab in general. And as
I do like how much of this movie
know that and realize it.
Yeah, I do like how much of this movie is just like 70s guys smoking and sweating and kind of hanging out in like in a computer lab, like being like, are these ants going to talk to us? Like, are we going to do something about, do something here?
One going insane, one just trying to do math.
Yeah, and one of my favorite sort of cross-cutting examples in this film is the sequence that Andrew was talking about, where we watch this, this perfect vision of, a harmonious society of sacrifice and a division of labor with preordained roles, and able to execute and evolve and adapt, at will, incredibly powerful as a mass, but as he said, kind of defenseless as an individual. Like, it's just a small little creature. But the contrast to watching that is watching Hubs and James come outside to look at the chemical weapon massacre that they've committed. Yeah. And they show all the ants murdered there, but then they also show the 2 farmers that they have killed there. And this is one of the most interesting moments for me, because they find out that James is really upset that they have killed these people, and it's a really horrifying image. Like, they have literally killed them with chemical weapons. Like, their skin is fucked up, they're trying to cover their faces, there's ants running through their body through the holes and things like that. And the guy Hubs just says, you know what, people get killed sometimes. It's a shame they didn't leave when we told them. Now come over here and look at this chain of ants that formed to blow up the generator in this car. It's amazing. It's very cold, very ruthless, and like, it's pragmatic in the moment in this war against the ants. But it's such a contrast to the sequence that Jamie already mentioned later, where they actually do successfully like massacre, an entire wing of the ants. And there is this whole like funeral montage of it.
And there's
where like
gore.
The ants are
like, they actually show the basically
ants
it's
being
like
crushed by
earthquake.
rocks.
Yeah. And so, and what's funny to think about too is just how small those rocks probably actually were to crush the ants, because they're doing these, you're going into the microscopic world of the ants, and, they have basically their lower half with the big butts that they got are just squished, and they spray out this green guts or blood or whatever it is, and it just feels very much like the exploitation movies that we see. Just the violent aspect of it. They included the gore.
Yeah, well, and it's just so amazing because, like, again, part of this on like a literal level is the scientists at war with the ants, and there's various ways that they fight this war. Like, sometimes the ants will, try to bite their way in, and they end up kind of like fucking up some mantises. One of my favorites is when they just like throw the mantis into a pile of their computers and electrocute the mantis to death.
And before that,
it's just an incredible action image.
Yeah, and before that, they show it's almost like a Mission Impossible sequence where this ant is crawling down the spiral wire, and you can literally put the Mission Impossible music behind it. It'd be like dun 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 dun, and then he starts to bite off the wires.
But it's a real ant, yeah.
But anyway, then the praying mantis comes up, and before the one ant comes to pull the mantis down and destroy both the beast and the air conditioning, it eats the one ant alive just in front of its friend, and there is like, you know, you've seen this before probably if you've ever watched a nature documentary, but just the context of knowing these ants as things that communicate and feel.
Yeah, the tone and mood makes a difference. It's not like an objective animal nature is just taking its course.
Exactly.
Like there is real dramatic thrust
and the one
to the sequences that we're watching.
That we're watching not get eaten, but the one that's watching the other ant get eaten is an ant that we've seen from the very beginning. It's got like the green butt or whatever, and it seems to be something that's trying its best separate from the colony to communicate with the human beings and say that they're not necessarily there to commit violence against them. It's just like we're trying to communicate and progress and kind of come together in some way. And then, you know, even with that ant, you get this great sequence where it very much reminded me of the Incredible Shrinking Man that we covered last week, where you just have this small creature that's trying its best to survive in this giant world, which includes shots of like Hub's fingers trying to smack it or grab it.
Yeah, that stuff is great.
That's so detailed.
Awesome. Where his it is like the Incredible Shrinking Man, where like the guy is fighting a cat, but like the house cat is like the size of a giant monster that he's fleeing from. It's the same thing, but like macro photography of Hubs's hand just like clumsily smashing around the floor and breaking glass and bleeding and things like that. There's also great ways that they combine shots of ants and humans together, where they use like rear projection, so you'll get like the silhouetted over the shoulder shot of like an ant, and it'll be like with like the farmer's granddaughter kind of gets trapped in there with the two scientists because she survives the chemical warfare attack by hiding, and then she is in there during sort of like these attack sequences where she's trying to also express her revenge against the ants because the ants killed her grandparents as she sees it. So like
that's one of the first things she does is destroy their little setup they have in the lab.
So it's very interesting watching the ants just like respond to, you know, like they view the humans as like aggressors in this situation and are just responding in turn.
And then I almost forgot about this, but because she does that, she starts to think that they're coming after them because of her. Right. And then she does kind of like a self-sacrifice when in fact I would put my money on Hubs. So...
Yeah, it's
James is hilarious because he's just there. He's just like, I just wanted to spend a couple weeks of science in the sun, man. I didn't want no war with some goddamn fucking ants. Yeah. Like, what the fuck?
Well, coming back just very briefly to what you were saying, Jamie, about like the ants sort of doing a little ant funeral and everything. I feel like there's a lot of effort to contrast like the behavior of the ants and the behavior of the humans. And maybe 100%. And to I guess to suggest as well that like for the ants there's an evolution taking place, you know. They're changing, they've developed this kind of hive mind communication across different kinds of ants, because this isn't just an ant colony of a single type of ant. They've started to sort of, you know, recruit and involve different types of ants and different sizes and colors of ants, and they're like spawning new types of ants. And they have that whole sequence where, you know, the special poison immune ants that they birthed to go up and build the sort of reflective apparatus to attack the scientists with. Those ants all get killed in that when they get sort of broken apart. And you know, is
that when they start doing the sonic warfare with like the dog whistle noise that they're doing, and like to us it's just like an annoying sound, but then it's cross cut with them where it's basically operating as like this, you know, this earth shattering event, this kind of like an earthquake
resonation that's sort of shaking their whole thing apart. And you do get to see all those internal angles of everything crumbling and falling down and crushing ants. And after that's happened, the other ants come out and they retrieve all of the bodies and they take them down and they line them up in rows like it's...
military funeral, baby. Yeah. They're like mourning them.
There's even a sad score, like kind of like military... I don't know if there's snares that are necessarily like a funeral march or something like that, but there are like very somber horns and things like that. So
and they line them all up like it's Arlington, you know? In these long rows and everything, and the ants kind of bow down and mourn them. And meanwhile, we have contrasted with that the human scientist who's like, so we kind of cooked some people while we were doing it.
So we killed people. Yeah, fuck that shit.
It was an accident.
Yeah.
Oh well. Yeah.
He's
100%.
completely disinterested in the loss of human life that's happened here. So it's almost like we have this kind of switching of the places where the ants are coming to develop like, an empathy and a grief for the loss of other ants. And at the same time, we're being shown this kind of this callousness and carelessness from the humans involved. I think one of the things that's quite admirable about this movie, even if it doesn't always succeed, because I think that it would be a very reasonable criticism to say that Bass seems infinitely more interested in directing like visual scenes and components of like visual design and movement and communication than he is in directing the parts of the movie that involve like actors performing and playing characters.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah, that would be fair.
It's kind of like threw me back the first time I watched it because I was just I was absolutely just I loved every bit when they showed the ants and how they were communicating and evolving and all of that, and then just some of the human aspects I could tell he just didn't take as much interest in. But it still comes together well. But yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and I saw a criticism. I was reading some pieces about it and saw a criticism that was saying that he's very adept at directing these sequences of like color and shape and movement and everything, but doesn't seem to have that grasp of the sort of really basic elements of like film storytelling and language, like where people are in a scene spatially and how they're moving around and all that sort of stuff, like just the really sort of basic stuff. And these are all things that absolutely make sense when you understand like who he is and what he's about and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So, I think that those would be relevant criticisms, but at the same time, it's also makes for like this really interesting film where you can see the things that he's attempting to do in terms of like giving an even weighting to the perspective of the ants and the perspective of the humans, sort of contrasting their behaviors, and maybe most importantly, doing it all for the ants and the perspective of the ants, doing it all without dialogue and without explicitly telling you at any point, this is what the ants are doing. This is like, I think a different filmmaker would maybe have set up some device where the humans were able to observe what the ants were doing, and they'd have a character there saying, oh, now we can see, hey, they're exhibiting this kind of behavior that ants do.
Right.
Or they'd say, this is remarkable. Ants don't do this kind of behavior.
No, but we're given these amazing procedural sequences of figuring out what it is they're doing, seeing their minds at work, and then also having the visuals find a way to express emotion through that. Like the fact that you feel as much as you feel for these ants in these sequences and that it feels dramatic and it feels mournful is, a true testament to his skill as a visual filmmaker in that way. Yeah, and then also too, as it applies to the human stuff, I find that the underplaying of the human elements ends up playing into this overall idea of that these characters are in like this larger constructed maze. Like they do feel like they are just cruel test subjects by the end of the film.
Yeah.
And they slowly realize that the ants are doing that to them as well. They're like, yeah, we're not observing them. They're observing us, seeing who is the smartest and the strongest and who has the qualities that they're looking for in their post-human, post-normal ant society where we are going to be formed into like one thing.
Yeah, because they don't even expect that the ants will figure out that the air conditioning is specifically connected to their research and the technology that they're using, but it just kind of happens, and when it's destroyed they figure out what went down because of the ants, the mantis, whatever, and they're like, oh my god, they're advancing, they know what we require to do our work and to survive, and they're consciously destroying it.
Yeah, and I think that by that point there is this kind of, as Andrew kind of mentioned at the front, where it tells you up front that you're doomed, but you're watching humans resist against that and do an equal battled perspective war.
Yeah.
And at that point you go, okay, well, who's going to win at this point? But there are these subtle hints that there's something more hopeless and claustrophobic that's, taking place here that starts to make more sense to these characters as they slowly get, more hysteric and sort of delirious, and with this continued assault that they are losing against. I mean, at one point, the granddaughter is so convinced that the ants are just seeking personal revenge against her, which is, from what we understand, is a ridiculous thing to think. She's so convinced, she basically just decided she's going to commit suicide for the protection of the others, and she goes singing. Jamie, did you see what she was singing?
No, maybe I missed it.
Leaning on the everlasting arms of the Lord, baby. The song from Night of the Hunter, which we just covered a couple weeks ago.
That. Yeah, I didn't even write it down.
She does sing it a little bit differently, but she's in kind of like barefoot and becoming one with the with the grass and the land.
That makes
she walks into the beauty of the sky.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, so that aspect I thought was really intriguing, and it ends up being like that isn't even what actually happens. As we kind of finish into the big climax of the film, where the two scientists are deciding that they are going to make their way. They have been heated up. All of their equipment is breaking down. They're going crazy. Hubs is also been bitten and kind of poisoned by an ant, and is starting to get sort of
mad a little bit.
Yeah, he can't even put his boots on. And he decides the only way out of this is to suit up and hunt down the queen ant and fuck up the queen ant. That is the only thing left for them to do. But as soon as he escapes,
of it is when he gets all he's getting really just erratic and kind of manic, and he's like, "Where are the grenades?" And then James just responds to him "You used every single one of them when you destroyed the towers at the beginning."
He's like, all of them. So anyway. when we were saying earlier that we started with phase 1, which is the growing threat and the observation. Phase 2 is the scientists trying to communicate with them and also starting to try and confront them directly. And at that point, Hubs is still kind of laboring under the illusion that, he sort of says something along the lines of, "Oh, they've developed this intelligence. We're being confronted with a power, and it's our job as basically the stand-in for mankind in this situation to confront that power and meet it with our own power and show them what the limits of their power is." So he's basically saying at this point, no, man is the dominant species on this planet, and we should act accordingly. We'll put them in their place. And whereas
we have a chance to educate a lesser being. That kind of thing. Yeah,
very. Ironically, in dealing with ants, it's a very colonial attitude.
Yeah.
So he's sort of still at this point, he's entertaining this idea that it is their role to stand here, to hold fast and push back the tide of what he sees very clearly as this something that is both incredibly interesting but also a direct threat. Whereas Lesko is not convinced about any of this at this point, and he still sees the merit in attempting to communicate rather than to retaliate or attack. By the time
he wants to find a consolidation of interests with them, an agreement.
Yeah, and by the time we get to phase 3, which we have entered at this point, phase 3, we are at the stage where the ants have just overpowered the humans. They have them stuck in their little dome tent research lab. Hubs is going crazy. Lesko realizes that Hub was lying about calling a helicopter to come and pick them up. When he tries to call them himself. They think that
the farmer's granddaughter has killed herself.
Yep, she's gone off. So basically, all of the humans at this point are having their own reactions to it. Hub's reaction is, we need to fight and destroy the ants. We need to, cut the snake off at the head. Despite the fact that, having been bitten himself, he's been hiding his limp arm for a significant point, for a significant amount of time at this point. And so he is still of the mind that he's getting kind of delirious, and he is of the mind that the only thing they can do is destroy the ants. So he's representing that human impulse. Lesko, meanwhile, is still of the mind that the only thing they can attempt to do is communicate to show them that there is another intelligence at hand. And the girl, the farmer's granddaughter, she has already sort of just resigned herself to the idea that, you know, they're completely
screwed.
They're completely screwed.
The ants have won. Eat me.
But also, I mean, when they first brought her into the lab, after she came out of the basement of the farmhouse and fainted, they first brought her in and they were examining some of those ants in a glass case. And she was overcome with grief and has lashed out at those ants and, you know, smashed the container they were in with something. And so there's suggestions, you know, she says, oh, could the ants be reacting to like something maybe somebody did or some aggression somebody showed? She's taken on
What?
Yeah, well, and so she has taken on, you know, the idea that like she's accepted that they are responsible for antagonizing the ants and for trying to, you know, combat nature. So they each represent these interesting viewpoints of what might be their way out of this. You know, one is at one end of the scale is destruction, the other end of the scale is complete surrender. And in the middle is the attempt to like communicate or compromise.
Harmonize, yeah.
Yeah.
And so...
which is really interesting because when Hubs breaks his way out, because he's got the, you know, he's like, I am just going to kill the queen. And they confront the ants directly. This is their final stand that they are making. And Hubs is immediately blinded by all of these lights that these, you know, these new sort of poison immune ants have been setting up throughout the course of the film that's been slowly heating them up. But it's now also a direct obstruction of his vision as he runs out. And as a result of that, he falls into the trap, a literal dirt hole trap that they set up for him, where they then just eat him alive right in front of Lesko in that moment.
Yeah.
Which he is then just like horrified by, and he's like, oh my God, like maybe Hubs is right. Like at that point it goes into this moody crossfade montage that's amazing of his like sweaty face and his cracked helmet with an ant in it and the fields and the mountains. And I believe they shot the exterior stuff of this in Africa to make it as Arizona, but it's beautiful. And him like stripping his suit off in like the sun-stroked heat and the chemical tank that he's spraying and the screaming face of his superimposed over images of, you know, him monologuing about like, I wish we could have, you know, come up with some kind of understanding, but it's not the way that it's going to be. I've made the calculations, and at their rate of expansion using this intelligence, their powers of organization, their network of communications, their genetic adaptation, they're going to move quickly into deserts and countrysides and eventually lay siege to towns and cities, and they will learn as they advance and anticipate our moves. The only counterattack is a direct assault on the queen right now. And I wish it wasn't me, but I got to do it. Like he, because of the horror that he's seen of Hubs, he actually has adopted the, you know, his empathy has adopted the Hubs mindset. Which is a very interesting idea, because then that is immediately destroyed by him actually making his way into the lair of the queen, and these like amazing images of like a spotlit doorway that he breaks down, him sliding down like what looks like a giant anthill hole and stuff like that. Yeah. So good.
And it's what seems to lead into the first time that he's able to really communicate with them. Because he's the guy that's been trying to do that the entire time to resolve the issues that they've had. And then when they start to merge, I guess, as one, and also merge with the ant colony, I'm not entirely sure, but it's because it gets pretty psychedelic and trippy by the end of this. But
yeah, because he sees the farmer's granddaughter emerge from the sand, not the queen. He expects to see the queen, and he's going to blow her up with the giant canister of chemicals that he's brought with him. But it's not. It's the farmer's granddaughter who has become one with the ants.
Well, what does he say at the end? He says the thing they wanted us. And
yes,
and it like seems like more to cooperate at the end of the day. Like, obviously we've seen this war, but it seems like what they were trying to do was communicate, just like James was, and say, like, we're trying to fuse together. We're not trying to necessarily take over. We're trying to cooperate.
There's points.
Yeah.
I think there's sort of multiple points in the movie that are sort of hints to what's happening at the end, because they talk about much earlier in the film, they talk about the behavior of some particular types of ants that will attack anything that comes into sort of range of them that could be considered a threat. A threat sort of in any way, and that's how they've treated Hubs. Hubs has been an antagonist. He has attacked them. His only goal is to destroy them, and so they have deliberately trapped and killed him at the earliest opportunity.
Which means they preemptively thought about that too, right? They knew that someone was going to come to them, rather than trust them in any way, or it just shows that they knew exactly what at least Hubs was ready to do.
Well, yeah, because that's just it. The two humans who approach the ants and don't have this like murderous glee in their eye while they do it, do not get murdered and eaten alive by the ants in the vicious way that they do to Hubs.
Yeah, they come to an understanding.
Yeah, so it's really and the way that he shoots this understanding is just so interesting, because there's this giant sand pit, and the farmer's granddaughter appears out of it, and her hands are there. He embraces her. It starts doing these psychedelic crossfade images of like that. This is the stuff that reminded me of like the altered state sequences with the whole brain stuff that they do in that, and like the sort of vision quest elements of that. And there's like certain images in here where it's like you can see the horizon with the sun rising, and you can see the sun rising in the middle of his forehead, and then the entire shot is sort of obstructed through the vision as if you're looking at it through like an ant's eye, which is actually a shot we see earlier in the film too, a sort of creepy POV shot where the ants are like voyeuristically spying on the scientists and stuff like that. Right. So there's like really, really interesting elements in this where he comes to this more blissful, beautiful, they are showing him that they also want to harmonize and create a future together, one not of violence, but one of them all combined into one thing. And he does that by combining all of these actual, visual images together. And here's where I have to ask you guys, did you watch the original ending to this film?
I was going to ask you that.
I don't know. I don't know.
So, yeah, I think like you're saying, Josh, what we sort of seem to take away from it at the end is that the humans that it's willing to take on are the ones that are willing to cooperate, and I guess, like as is the nature of ants, become part of the hive. Become part of the colony.
And what does he say? He says, we were not sure for what purpose, but we were sure that we would be told that like we're going to be accepted into this society as you get this image of them.
They'll be getting commanded. Yeah.
But he also seems to have a confidence
and you get the silhouetted horizon. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to, he also seems to have a confidence in whatever idea that we don't learn about, but whatever idea these ants seem to have, he seems like he has a confidence in it. Like he thinks they are someone to follow for whatever reason. We don't really understand what their overall philosophy is, but he's trusting in it, and I think that says something.
Well, this is why I have to ask you if you've seen the original ending, because this ending of the theatrical version and the most commonly available version until. I mean, I guess still, but this original 6-minute longer ending, which is basically the same ending, to be clear. Okay. Like it ends the same way with these characters, coming to this, sort of understanding and consolidation with the ants visually through the images, and like you see them like silhouetted against the horizon of the sun, and then you also see the ants in the kind of like the same position get their own shot like that. Like the human and ant silhouette are even made to look the same in terms of the way that the bodies are in the frame. But the original ending, which you can find on YouTube and is like available in high quality and apparently is included on some prints after the film and included as like a Blu-ray extra now. But if this was spliced into the actual film, it would just be so much better. But it's a full additional, basically like 4 or 5 minutes of the consolidation sequence, and it gives you full visions of what the ant-like future would actually look like.
And it's so fucking
It's
cool.
positive or negative?
It's
a little bit of both. It has that Cronenbergian element where like some of it looks so surreal and strange, and to the point where it almost looks like authoritarian ant-like. But then there's other images where it's so beautiful, and they're creating a new form of existence where like it's hard to describe. Like it's them like running through lava and spinning and becoming different various sort of like space shapes and running on massive structures that look like pyramid mazes that the giant ants are dominating. And then there's human bodies without faces. There's like hands ripping through foreheads that are on fire. There's like this body horror dystopia of surreal landscapes, but it's just showing you the process. Because at that point, it's like the humans are going to become something else, and it might be a painful process, but by the end it comes to like these more like beautiful architecture and like a naked woman giving birth to like a son or a planet, or like faces colliding and merging into liquid. It's nuts.
Okay, that seems more ambiguous and not as hopeful as this ending, I would say, because I haven't seen the original ending, because it's just Go ahead. It's exactly what I described is that like Cronenberg does, where it's one of those things where you're scared and it's different and it's weird and it's horrifying in some ways terrifying. And surreal. But the tone of it, I have to say, the tone straight up, it's beautiful. Like it's gorgeous. It feels blissful despite some of the imagery being, overpoweringly scary in some ways.
Yeah,
so it's a really intriguing.
I would probably describe it as it's a big montage, and like you were saying, Josh, there's sort of like suggestions and evocations of like the planet having been terraformed into these like geometric superstructures, and humans sort of living in there, and there's this suggestion of kind of like ants sort of watching what the humans are doing, almost like they're sort of pets. But at the same time, that's interspliced with like all these sort of these overlapping shots of like eagles soaring in the sky and like and humans just flying. It has this sense of simultaneously you're going to become part of this gigantic thing, this gigantic mechanism, and at the same time it's going to offer you this freedom. You're going to become part of this, but you'll also become what it's free, like.
That it definitely has the scary monster element of you are going to have to accept your new insect overlords on some level, but on another level, they are going to change you into a being that is beyond what you've ever been. And there is a kind of like the way that he shoots it, there is an allure to it in a way. It's interesting.
I'm going to definitely check it out. I'm very excited to watch this.
I'm going to send it to you immediately.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I didn't know that there was. I mean, I think I read on the wiki that there was an original ending, but I didn't know how available it was. So I'm looking forward to watching it.
Yeah, apparently it was just made fully available like online and like on Blu-rays and stuff in the last like 2 or 3 years. So
cool, very cool.
Yeah, so either way, very, very cool, and totally adds in, because again, there is something sort of really interesting where you're looking at this future ant-dominated world where there might be this new hierarchy, but there is sort of like this comforting acceptance that the form kind of takes to it, that this new form of living, might be interesting, and it might be liberating in a way, and it does that through like the sprawling kind of sci-fi visionary sequence stuff that you can imagine seeing in like 2001. Like, I kid you not, the thing I thought about was the transcendent giant baby from 2001.
Yeah.
That was what I was feeling like watching this. Like, you don't look at that rebirth. And go, yeah. So that's what I was thinking about watching this sequence, and it was very, very intriguing.
Yeah.
So everyone, I would recommend going out and watching the I wouldn't even call it like the original ending, or because it's not, it's the same ending, it's just extended.
Right. The extended ending. Yeah.
Yeah, it is like an extra
Yeah.
5 minutes.
It is. It is 5 straight minutes of stuff that will make you think about 2001: A Space Odyssey and like Tree of Life and, you know, other various things like that.
Yeah, I can't believe that some studio piece of shit watched that and went, "Oh, that's too scary or unsettling for me." It would be much better if it was just kind of a guy staggering through the countryside saying, "I'm going to be part of the ant show." Like it's just,
and I'm kind of cool with that.
yeah. Whereas that whole sequence
They actually take the narration out too, Jamie, for this.
Oh wow! So it's just this future of ant life.
It's just this, yeah. It's just this experience, this sensual like experience.
That's cool. Yeah, I can't wait to watch it. I wish I did before this conversation.
Yeah, it's really cool. But yeah, pivoting, I think, towards a reductive rating around here. This gets a really solid 4 for me. Once again, I think that this is for Saul Bass's only directorial outing, I think this is incredibly accomplished. The only issue I can see with it is that, he was so enamored by the psychedelic 2001 inspired sci-fi horror story he was telling that he kind of, he did lose a little bit of interest in the human story of it. But at the same time, you could say that this is trying to be a post-human story in a way. It's literally trying to, suggest a reality where, we don't look at human life in that exact same way. So the idea that, he puts them into this sort of experimental constructive maze doesn't completely bother me. And I think if this just had the extended ending as the ending, and there was a version of this movie that was just that, I think this would even be high for me, because cool. I think Bass just has such a strong and unique visual and sonic sensibility to the film. Again, combining, like piercing synth sounds that totally get you involved in the reality of these ants. The macro bug photography is insane and unlike anything that you've ever seen, and absolutely gets you to empathize. Like you're watching bugs or ants like straight up perform action sequences. You're watching them do funeral sequences. Yeah, where you feel for them. The time-lapse imagery is amazing. The crossfade montages and kind of abstract compositions of landscape formations and the various light sources that are all throughout the film that are so blinding and beautiful. It's unreal. And I think it all contributes to this film that is at once terrifying and surreal and strange to watch. But ultimately, I do feel this film, and it feels absolutely beautiful and blissful and liberating by the end, which is a crazy thing to say about a movie where a guy sees a future where, he doesn't have a face and the ants are dominating him in like a pyramid hierarchy. And he's like, this is pretty cool. I for one, welcome our new insect overlords. And it sounds nuts that you could also experience that watching the film, but I swear to God, if you look up this original ending, that is how you will feel. It is incredible, and really it is unlike anything I've ever seen. So high 4 for me.
Yeah, I'll be looking it up right after this. I recently actually in my apartment had a little bit of an ant infestation, and so for a movie to make me sympathize with them,
did you sign a peace treaty with them
in any way? No, I didn't. We went all out war, boy. I went Hubs mode, and I gotta say, I almost wanted the grenade launcher that Hubs uses at the beginning. So anyway, if a film like this can make me sympathize with my mortal enemy, then I think it did a fantastic job. I love all of the photography of the ants and the way that they light it. Like I was saying, it kind of has this like blue flashing light at a certain point when it's showing the queen for the first time, and it reminds you of like aliens or something. It's very cool, and I do think that the human aspect is a little bit undercooked just compared to how much he clearly cares about the ants. But that still adds a little bit of something to the story, especially where it leads at the end. So, I think this is a very incredibly unique film that everyone should check out. Yeah. So, 4 out of 5.
For you, Andrew?
I'm definitely going the same direction, which is if I was recommending this like purely on the basis of it as a narrative film, it'd probably be a 3. Yeah. But I think the same thing you guys are describing. It's just really pushed over the edge for me in terms of it's very difficult to think of another film that is kind of anything like this, you know? Wonderful soundtrack, amazing, like all of that amazing macro photography, which was apparently by wildlife photographer Ken Middleham. Filmed all
awesome
of the
job.
Good
all
job,
those
man.
close-ups and stuff. There's a sequence in it where the farm girl is like lying down in the cot and sleeping, and there's an ant crawling over her skin. And all of the shots in that sequence are amazing. It kind of makes me think of I watched Tarsum Singh's The Fall. No, not The Fall, The Cell.
Okay.
With some people recently, the Jennifer Lopez one, which has, you know, a lot of really, really striking imagery of like desert landscapes and stuff like that. And that it really evoked that sort of like, you know, using like the shadows and shapes of this woman's body to have it look like this ant's walking across a desert landscape. But also the camera is like under her clothes. You can see the cloth.
Yeah, that stuff's crazy.
Yeah.
So it's not just like incredibly detailed close-up macro photography of an ant on someone's skin. It's happening inside the layer between someone's clothing and their body. And you're getting these amazingly composed shots and everything. It's like really remarkable.
Yeah, it's insane how they can make this microscopic photography like feel cosmic in the way that they do.
Jamie, I had moments at the start of the movie, like at the start of the movie when I was watching it, where I was like, are these little puppets?
Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely.
Because it's so detailed and filling up so much of the frame, and it's from like the mid-70s, you know?
Yeah, it feels like they're actually choreographing ants. Like they're sitting them down and being like, "You're going to go from point A to point B," but you're
great performances.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
So really early in the piece, I was just like, "Oh, are these like puppets or something?" But then looking at them in that level of detail, you're like, "No, they're too like you couldn't be." You couldn't be maneuvering something like that where there's just like absolutely no space in the sort of thorax and the legs and everything for any kind of like puppeteering or anything. Like just really remarkable stuff. Shots you have never seen before in a movie, and I'm sure you will never see again. If it is,
because the movie bombed and they cut his ending out and said, "Yep, never make another one."
Yep, watch
such a shame.
Yeah,
real Night of the Hunter, Charles Lawton type shit. It's like, come on.
Watch the
Let
movie.
the man make another film.
Watch the movie and immediately watch the extended ending, which you can find on YouTube and all that sort of stuff in high quality.
Yep.
But yeah, I will also
check out a monster B movie about intelligent colonizing ants that has more in common stylistically with like Kubrick and Terrence Malick.
There you go.
Check it out. But yeah, that being said, I think that wraps it up for everything this week. That was The Fly from 1986 and Phase 4 from 1974. Thanks so much, guys, for listening. And thanks, Andrew, for joining us and for bringing these films with you. If you've got anything to plug while you're here at the last minute here, this is where we have you do that.
You can check out Bunta Vista. It's news about things that don't really matter, you know?
Check it out.
What's going on in British trucking accidents? We got a lot of segments. You know, there's all kinds of stuff. We're talking about weird things that happened at zoos. We're talking about we're talking about shipping news. We got all kinds of stuff. And our pledge to you is that almost none of it will make you feel bad.
There it is.
It's a great thing to feel in these times. So yes, go check out Bunta Vista. For our listeners, we are going to be back in 1 week's time where we are going to be doing a bonus episode over on the Patreon for you guys where last minute sub in, because I forgot to mention to Jamie what it was before we started. We are going to be talking about a film that I think Jamie just watched recently called The Hitchhiker from 1953, directed by Ida Lupino, the first... considered the very first mainstream film noir film directed by a woman.
Nice. I wanted to
very
rewatch
cool
it,
film
so I'm
about,
excited we are.
I bet that's what I kind of figured. So it's a kidnapping / hitchhiker kind of film, and we're going to be pairing it with, Jamie can probably guess, a film called The Hitcher from 1986.
Yes,
also a film. Yes, Rutger Hauer in that one. And it is strikingly, this double feature came to me because it is the same premise, but the style, the Hitchhiker has more of this, a little bit more of a calmer kind of sensibility to it. And The Hitcher is as downright nightmarish and filthy. As you could possibly imagine, the same premise done, where a guy picks up a hitchhiker and he is found, dealing instead with like a supernatural force of like pure random cruelty and destruction.
Big points for C. Thomas Howell in that movie as well.
Yes,
he's great in that, and I think he's a really, I know he's still working now and everything, but I think he's a really unsung hero of like 80s cinema,
Hell yeah.
He's in The Outsiders, he's in Red Dawn, he's in pops up in E.T., he's in lots of cool little flicks from that period, and I always really enjoy him.
Yeah, and the Hitcher is also written by Eric Red too, who wrote like Near Dark and Blue Steel, and so like other very moody genre films of the sort of like late 80s, early 90s. So very excited to talk about that. And then in 2 weeks' time, TBA.
Yeah,
we are figuring out exactly what it is that we are doing, but you guys will be very excited for the reason why, and we won't say anything just yet. So
that's right.
TBA. We are trying to organize something with someone, but we might have to sub something else in. We will find out in 2 weeks' time, but it's going to be a really sick episode, so look forward to it. But yeah, that being said, I think we're going to let Andrew get out of here, because we were like, this is going to be your first episode that's not 3 hours, and it still was.
We can't do it.
We can't stop ourselves.
We can't stop with you, man. Feel bad. That'll wrap it up for everything this week. Thanks so much for listening, everyone, and keep it sleazy.
Keep it sleazy.
Keep it sleazy for hours at a time.
Yes.